What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Omni-sensei here with What If a Vampire Was in Teen Wolf? Born in Blood. Part 2. If you enjoy this type of content, please smash the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description. Let's get into it. Allison Argent POV. As far as Allison Argent was concerned, her new school experience wasn't that bad, which was heavily attributed to her spending time with Malia. If she was to be perfectly honest, Allison prided herself in being able to read people, or at least was adept at picking up honest intentions. That was until she met Malia. If she were to make an evaluation of Malia, it was that the girl was brash, crude, quite dumb academically, and quick to resort to violence to get her thoughts through. When every one of these behaviors were viewed from an objective point of view, the conclusion they would arrive at was that the girl known as Malia Tate was a very simple girl. She was as easy to read like a book, and also as easily misunderstood. They haven't had that much time to really hang out, but that just made Allison look forward to when they did. While Allison herself was normally quite shy and reserved, she always found herself being swept along Malia's flow every single time the girl was around. She refused to comment on Tristan mainly because the signals she was getting from him were all over the place. More reserved than her, Tristan seemed like the type to always distance himself if the crowd got too big or the atmosphere got too warm. Like he would just up and leave if the surrounding got a little bubbly or if there was something attention-grabbing. It was like he abhorred the very idea of socialization and fun. She still hadn't gotten to ask them about their relationship with each other since it was clear that they were very close to each other. Like very close. It didn't have an ambiguous air but a natural one, as if they were siblings. Maybe cousins? Could be. She mulled over the fact as she made her way to her French class only to bump into somebody while coming down the stairs, and she would have fallen down if the person bumped into hadn't caught her as quick as he did. I'm so sorry. Should have watched where I was going. Her eyes widened at the close proximity and from the slight panic across the boy's face as he let her go, so did she. I was just trying to stop you from falling. Yeah, no. I perfectly understand. She waved her hands to stop him from trying to explain himself, as she was also at fault for not paying attention. They both stood there awkwardly, not knowing what else to say to the other party. I should get going. Yeah, me too. I have class right now, so. Yeah, me too. They both took an awkward step to give each other passage only to block themselves, which increased the awkwardness of the situation. But thankfully the boy just nodded at her and took an extra step before walking past her. Well, that was awkward. Allison said to no one in particular. Malia Tate POV. She was seriously beginning to wonder if this was some kind of torture technique that Satomi had been concocting for years in order to use against her after the old alpha had gotten enough of her rebelling. School was not fun at all. Now she was absolutely sure that the only reason why people fondly reminisce about their school life was either due to the party, the sports, or when they were having fun with their friends. She was damn sure no one actually missed the main act of learning. And not to mention the boring people that swarmed the halls on a daily basis. She preferred wood hiking any day over those. She failed to realize the presence of another person near her on her lab table, only for the person to call out her attention. Hey, I see we're grouped for this exercise. Crazy coincidence, huh? She finally observed who the person that turned out to be her lab partner was, only to face someone that just looked like he was going to bore the hell out of Day. My name's Styles. He extended his hand for a shake, but couldn't decide if he wanted a shake or a bump as his fist just changed motions. Malia just stared at Styles in a dumbfounded way as he made the most awkward expression of someone that had no clue on what to do that Malia had ever seen. Just gonna ignore me, cool. He just sighed and whispered under his breath, not having the foggiest idea that Malia heard him as clear as day. The subject on this roster's hour was chemistry experiments featuring titration, a simple experiment that was done to observe the level of concentration of an acid-base solution using analytical methods. Remembering why she was in this class in the first place and the little promise to Satomi and Joanne about enjoying high school as much as she could while also trying to put in a little bit of effort, She mentally cursed her lack of academic intelligence, which ended in knowing how to read and write. Basic sums and things you actually need in everyday life. I'm requesting an allowance raise by month's end. She was going to make Satomi pay, literally, for putting her through this. Swallowing the bitter pill in her mouth, she glanced at the stall. STYM? Stills? Yes, stills, and opened her mouth for the first time since entering this lab room. Hey, Stills, got any idea what this is all about? Reacting in a way that was too out of proportion that would have been perceived as over-exaggeration, Styles whipped his head to face Malia and dumbly stared in shock that she actually wanted a conversation with him. Seeing him blankly staring at her, she had to forcefully resist to verbally lash out at him and brought her finger between them, and when she was sure she had gotten his attention, she pointed it at their table and then the board where a few things were scribbled on. That motion of Malia's succeeded in snapping Styles back to reality, which made him cough in hollow embarrassment. Yes. The experiment. It's Not understanding why he was fidgeting and slowly resolving herself to sleep through the class if he turned out as dumb as she was or anywhere near her level, Malia nodded at him and silently prodded him to continue. Haha, sorry about that. My name is Styles, Stilinski. Styles took another approach after managing to get his stupid emotions in check when a beautiful hot girl started talking to him. I'm not Scott. Get your cool together. Malia replied succinctly. Right. So titration is basically just measuring how concentrated the given acid-base solution is. Styles started slow and gave the most basic explanation he knew because her question suggested that that was her level of understanding. It's not as complicated as all these test tubes and flasks make it seem. Getting into his comfortable zone, he scooted a little closer and showed Malia a diagram presentation of the assignment they were about to do. Honestly, what you need to first take note of is which liquid goes in which conical flask or tube. That way all you need to do once you start your experiment is just basic addition and subtraction and tabulating your results. He slowly explained. Malia, listening to Styles' explanation, looked at the picture he was showing her and memorized the way they were set up only to find out she didn't know which liquid does what. What about these, equations? Any way to tell which is acid or base, or even differentiate the liquids? Since she had nothing to do anyway, it wouldn't hurt to pick a few things up, and as she recently learned, students with too low grades were held a year back, while those who passed moved on ahead. She didn't like to think along that avenue. As if expecting that question and also confirming that his hypothesis was correct, and that she probably wasn't that smart, like at all, he pushed himself out of his comfort zone and tried making it clear to her as much as he can. Explaining easy things to dumb people was very hard after all. Well, the acid-base solutions are usually labeled, so you don't need to worry about identifying them for now. Throw in some indicator, this little guy here, and all you just have to do is tap it until the base, this one, changes color uniformly. There are a few exceptions, but that's just the basics to tide you over till the topic advances. Finishing his explanation, he took in deep breaths and then a little bit of an awkward stutter as he realized what he had just done. I didn't flip it, right? I mean, she asked in the first place, right? Malia put her fingers on her chin and scrunched her eyes as she contemplated everything he explained to her, the part she understood, before nodding as she committed it to memory. Maybe she'll surprise Tristan by teaching him something he didn't know. Got all that? Styles' exterior remained calm, but his mind was doing inordinate acrobatic flips as he waited for her answer, which he viewed as very important. After all, this would mean that he didn't have any problems talking to hot girls, and it was something else. Maybe there was a reason Lydia had been ignoring him for years now. Oblivious to Styles, his nervousness was clear as day to Malia. Even without her senses, she could clearly see how fast he was tapping his leg against the floor, and he reeked of desperation. Why do I feel like I just got myself into some weird cringe drama? Betraying her line of thoughts, she smiled at Styles and gave him his due thanks. Yeah, thanks a lot. You just made my day a little bearable. Hearing what she said, Styles looked around, urgently looking for someone he could fist bump at this very moment. Unfortunately, he couldn't just switch personality and whoop out in the middle of class, since he wanted to maintain whatever image Malia had of him. Okay class, settle down. The chemistry teacher, Adrian Harris, Styles' least favorite teacher in Beacon Hill, stepped inside the class, but not before Scott rushed in and took the vacant table at the back while looking weirdly at Styles, who was signaling him something with his hands behind his back that he didn't understand, and Malia Tate, the new girl that had the smell of nature and something else that he didn't know what it was yet. He ignored them and shared a table with Greenberg. So, Malia, do you play lacrosse? Do you want to watch me play lacrosse? He cursed fervently at himself for ruining the great start he had, making Malia give him a weird look. You play? It wasn't a question of interest, but rather a reflexive one, not that poor Styles could tell the difference. Yeah, I do, during practice. Maybe in a real game soon. It's never happened before, but it can happen, right? His voice dropped a bit as he remembered that he was now the only one warming the bench since Scott made first line. Mr. Stalinsky, why am I under the false impression that you'll for once not tempt my ire, especially when not in effective talking range with your second half? Mr. Harris called to Styles as he once again heard the unmistakable headache-inducing pitch of the boy's soundbox. My bad. Not willing to cause a scene, he relented without making one of his famous rebuttals at Mr. Harris's chiding. At his side, Malia just tried her best to listen to whatever the teacher said and ignore the emotional wreck that was Styles by her side. It was bad enough that the guy was oozing off weird negative emotional feedback, and it seemed that whatever it was just doubled in intensity. I'm clearly staying away from this guy's problem. I feel like I might want to rip out his spine and beat him to death with it. And besides, he smells of werewolf, probably from helping and staying with McCain during his shifts. Malia let out a tired sigh. I want to go home. She never knew that this very thought of hers was a collective one shared by all students after 12 noon. After the soul-crushing class and his failure at starting any meaningful conversation with Malia, who had all her focus on what Harris was teaching, Styles trudged away from class without even bothering to talk to Scott. Unlike what others might think about Styles due to first impressions, which was mainly heavily sarcastic, goofy to the point of stupidity despite being smart, an astute observer of hierarchy while being a delinquent according to a few people, Styles deep down was a very fragile person. Despite his already low confidence, trying and failing to start a meaningful and normal conversation with a beautiful girl sitting beside him did a few cracks to his confidence. He wasn't good at lacrosse, he didn't fit in most places that a kid like him should with natural ease, he was socially awkward, the girl he's had a crush on probably doesn't even know his name. He used sarcasm and smart rebuttals to get through most things, and at the end of it all, the only thing he had to show for it was a slighter, smarter brain and being the son of the Beacon Hills County Sheriff. Even Scott, who he had sympathized with since they were little, had grown up to be something entirely different in just a week's time. He was doing better at lacrosse than ever before, he was no longer asthmatic, and his special existence subconsciously gave him a boost in confidence, enabling him break out of the cocoon he trapped himself in for quite the long while. He would never in any circumstance show what he truly felt, not even to his best friend since childhood, Scott. Because he understood one fact, something he had been unfortunate to learn when he was young: no one truly cares. If he were to count the people that truly cared about him on one hand, he'd have extra fingers to spare, and he wasn't even joking. His dad, Scott, and Scott's mom. These were the three people who he knew actually cared if anything should happen, and of those three, he could say with full confidence that none truly understood him. So what was he to do? Whine in bed all day and complain that he isn't understood? No. That wasn't his style. He'd rather throw it to the deepest part of his mind and bury it there for eternity, while using his precious time to do something he absolutely loved, like helping Scott be a better werewolf. How hard can it be? I'll be Batman, and he'll be Robin. He's absolutely lost without me. Styles Stalinsky was a very normal boy, and while he might not be a super competent nurse like Melissa, a devout sheriff like his father, or a supernatural mythical creature of the night like Scott, he knew just how he was supposed to be to exist in this complicated and harmonious circle. He made a turn around the corner only for him to rush back with haste and hope no one saw him, and by no one he meant his father, Sheriff Stalinsky, who was oddly in school and flanked by deputies, clearly discussing something important with the principal. Styles was many things, and apparently a busybody was among those things, along with an almost instinctual urge to skid over the law as much as he could without completely crossing the line. Realizing that he was presented with yet another opportunity to scoop into his father's active cases, he made the brilliant decision of fetching the one person he knew that could hear whatever they were saying without being caught. He ran back from whence he came searching for Scott, since he knew his father could leave at that moment. I really could use some werewolf nose right about now. Thankfully, he found Scott at the locker section and pulled him along as he walked. Hey, come here. What? Less talking, more moving. He pulled Scott as they hid behind the stairs with Styles pointing to his father. Tell me what they're saying. Scott followed Styles' pointed direction and found Noah Stalinsky having a conversation with the principal. Scott focused his senses in their general direction, trying to pick the voices with enough clarity to hear. "Can you hear anything?"
"Sure."
Focusing a little harder, Scott picked up the voices and listened in on what the sheriff was telling their principal to do. "Curfew because of the body," he said, referencing the body part they found on the night Scott got bit. "Unbelievable. My dad's out there looking for a rabid animal, while the jerk-off who actually killed the girl is just hanging out, doing whatever he wants." He scowled with expressive anger and irritation as Derek, who they assumed was the killer, was just walking around. Scott shrugged at Styles' complaints while stating the obvious. "Well, we can't exactly tell your dad the truth about Derek." Styles pondered on what Scott said for a few seconds before refuting Scott's words with a determined face. "I can do something." Scott looked at his best friend with skepticism evident on his face. "Like what?" "Find the other half of the body." Styles answered before storming off while Scott was left to reboot for a second before he scoffed at Styles' delirious statement. "Are you kidding?" Scott followed Styles, trying to find what kind of reasoning he thought up to come to such a decision. "Do I look like I'm kidding? Think of it. If Derek's put away, then you don't have to worry about hunters or going on some murder spree with him, and the town will return back to normal." Styles explained to Scott. "And what if he decides to kill those at the sheriff's station after he is arrested?" Scott asked, still skeptical and rightfully so, which silenced Styles for a short time before he shook his head. "You both ran from the hunters, and if they've really been hunting werewolves for centuries, then I'm sure not even Derek would want to face them, and him killing the sheriff county, and also possibly ousting himself as a supernatural, will more than likely draw them towards him with full force. So no, I don't think he will kill anyone at the station." Though he hypothesized that entire scenario, he still wasn't sure about Derek's motivation, and he had a hunch that knowing that would change everything and make this haze over them clearer. "That's a big if, and you know it. We have no idea what an alpha is capable of after all." Unfortunately for Scott, all his dissuasion fell in defiant ears, and he had to follow behind Styles, as was the norm between them from the beginning. Having heard all that the both of them were talking about, Tristan was plagued by doubt since, in his opinion, it was a suicide mission trying to strong-arm an alpha, especially for Scott, as no alpha will take pity on any of their beta betraying them. Even the pacifist Satomi would kill any of her beta who betrayed her family. He also picked up a few pieces of info from their talks, one of which was the presence of the hunters already being in Beacon Hills and having had a confrontation with whoever this Derek was and Scott. It had been purely by chance that he came across them after deciding to take his mind off the matter, and what they were talking about had intrigued him a little. Either Stilinski was very smart or stupidly naive, as it was clear that he really did not understand what the consequences of his actions could cause. If Derek really was the alpha as they insinuated, and he really was behind the recent killings, then it was entirely possible, assuredly in fact, that a Beacon County cell wouldn't hold him at all if he wanted to get out, and the first person to die would be Sheriff Stilinski, and then McCall's parents before Styles, and then Scott would be the last to go. Ignorance truly is bliss. Not even him would entertain the thought of killing Satomi as he was, as that would spell death faster than he would realize. If such a thing were to happen, the first bunch of people to attack him would be none other than Brett, followed by Jong, DeMarco, Richard, Joanne, Tierney, even Lori. No one should ever doubt the bond between pack members, as that would only weaken them against any attacking enemy. Seeing the two idiots planning their death with such assuredness, he couldn't help but feel glad, because at least that way, the alpha would probably lay low for a while from the hunters before siring a new beta. He made an abrupt turn in his walk and set his new destination to the cafeteria to get something to eat before going home, and use that chance to meet up with Malia. Like always, the cafeteria was crowded, but there were quite a few empty and remote tables, so he could probably focus on his meal quietly. He got salad, beef and juice to go along with it, since all he needed was something light to hold him until he got home. From the small quantity he got, it could be derived that he preferred small portions of nutritious food than large amounts of unbalanced diet and junk food, another area he differed from Malia. He finished his plate, and after waiting for Malia for some time and figuring she either wasn't coming or was held up, he got up and left. He saw Allison in a conversation with one of the lacrosse players, but just walked by, making sure she didn't notice him, and called to gain his attention. He left the school and got into his car, knowing that Malia would likely ride with Allison or call him to come pick her up. Driving away from the school's car park, he brought out his phone and rang someone he knew he could get a lot of answers from. "Good afternoon, Elias," he greeted as soon as the call was picked up. "Oh, Tristan? I wasn't expecting your call. How are you and the cub holding up?" From his tone, it was clear that this Elias was an elderly man, but apart from being an elder to Tristan, he was also an elder to almost everyone in Satomi's pack, as he was one of her oldest betas, Elias Town, having been following Satomi for over 50 years. Tristan allowed a chuckle at his question. She's been a little grumpy for the past few days, so I'm the one constantly getting bitten. Elias laughed over the call for more than a few seconds before calming down. So what's the reason for you calling? It's weird to receive a call from you when you could just visit. Elias asked. Not bothering with any other exchange as they were past that, he inquired from Elias the reason he called. It's about the recent killings. Someone in Beacon Hills got bit, and it looks like their alpha's name is Derek. I was wondering if you knew anything about an alpha named Derek. He then described Derek's appearance as best as he could to Elias. Elias hummed over the call and silence flowed for over a minute before Elias spoke once again. I don't think I remember any alpha named Derek, so rather than being an old alpha, it could be one that killed for it, and I think that Vendetta signage front quite a while back is heavily connected to it. While I don't know any alpha named Derek, I once knew a beta called Derek. Derek Hale, son of Talia Hale, whose family burned in the Hale fire over 6 years ago. It's not actually far-fetched for young Derek to become an alpha, as his family has been a patron to Beacon Hills for well over centuries. They practically built the place and even came to a truce, although short-lived, with the hunters. Tristan frowned as a whole web of complications started to unfold inside his mind. He could already tell that the story would be quite a deep one and extremely informative, he sighed. I'll talk to Satomi. Knowledge is power, but also a curse. He needed Satomi's permission and also input if this would be dangerous for him to know or could in a way endanger the pack. Don't worry about that. I'll take it up with her, I'm sure she wouldn't mind. Elias waved off his concern. While he wouldn't dare waive explicit orders of his alpha, he's known her long enough to know what she'll react to and what she considers not important. Thank you, Elias. He gave his gratitude, but the old man just laughed it off. Oh please. While we old people don't have much to teach the younger generation, we are never out of stories to tell. The Hale family were easily the oldest family in Beacon Hills and even one of the lasting ancient ones across the continent. And it wasn't just their longevity that made them renowned and respected across the neighboring communities. Unlike other werewolf families, most of the Hale descendants, of those who were born werewolves, had the special ability to completely turn into wolves irrespective of their hierarchical status. There was once a time before the fire, where Beacon Hills used to be a beacon to all supernatural races with the Hale family at the top. Back then, they were synonymous with the spiritual leaders of Beacon Hills, and their family matriarch and alpha, Talia Hale, oversaw all alphas in Beacon Hills and its environs. No major decisions were made without her knowledge or input, and she was also the one who put stops to the numerous squabbles between prideful alphas. Though they were an ancient werewolf family, not all of their children were born werewolves, and those who didn't have the choice to either decide to become one or stay human, producing a very harmonious settlement that permeated outside of the Hale family to all of Beacon Hill supernaturals, even the hunters. Derek was one of Talia's children, and among one of the very few lucky ones who survived the fire that burned the rest of their family to death, save for one whose condition was no different than death after having third-degree burns over 75% of his body and has been in a coma ever since. The remaining Hales fled Beacon Hills ever since, along with most of the alphas of that time, while the others kept away from the community to avoid being targets. So you think the killings are why Derek is back? It'll have to be connected to his family if he indeed is the one slashing and hacking at people, but I feel like something is lacking in that picture. Tristan said out loud while working on their dinner with the phone on loudspeaker. Elias replied, True. If it is indeed Derek, then I don't think it was at random, and given that it was a public announcement of vendetta, then we can safely assume that it's personal. The Hale fire. Quite possibly, because I don't see a reason why he'd want to come back to the place he lost his entire family. Tristan thought for a bit and asked with caution. The fire. Do you have any idea who caused it? The call went quiet, making Tristan pause his motion and waited patiently for Elias' response. He knew exactly what he was asking because he was sure that he wasn't the only one who's had this type of question in their head after listening to the story behind the Hale family's arson. Whether they voiced the question or not depended on why they wanted to know. Elias released a deep sigh while his voice went a tone lower. There was no evidence, nothing to tie the fire to any suspect, but we all had a suspicion of who did it. Tristan hummed, coming to the same conclusion he did when Elias first mentioned the Hale fire. The Hunters. You might be wondering why an ancient family like the Hales would share the same territory with hunting wolves when they very well knew the history between werewolves and hunters, right? Tristan didn't say anything but nodded as that question did cross his mind, as he felt that was a very stupid decision on the Alpha's part, but also kept quiet because he knew it should have been something more complicated than a simple acceptance. Just like werewolves and other supernaturals that move in circles, the hunters had a code of their own, Nous chassons ce que nous chassent. French. Yes. While there are many other hunting families, the ones that resided in Beacon Hills then and now could be said to be the oldest in existence. It means we hunt those who hunt us. He revealed. Just like us, they too followed their code, only hunting packs and other stray supernatural creatures who enjoy feasting on humans. It was also for this reason why Talia and the other alphas were able to coexist, for however long that lasted. Elias, though old, remembered what Beacon Hills had been like in the past and how it had been a haven for countless species of supernaturals, all living along the guidelines set by the alphas of the territories and the Hale family. Alas, nothing can forever be hidden under the eternal gaze of the sun. The hunters struck and the packs bore their fangs. Fortunately or unfortunately, their pack had been away from Beacon Hills during that period. Elias, I don't understand something. Tristan called out. If the hunting families have their own code, why would they want to kill the Hale family when they were the ones keeping Beacon Hills together? At this point, Elias' voice had croaked a bit, showing his extreme distaste of the subject and how tired he was, but none of that prevented him from answering Tristan's curious questions. Different from us werewolves packs, the code, when in regards to the hunters, were less of a way of life and more of a guideline. They just had to know it was there so as to always be responsible for their actions. They decide if they want to skirt their own code. Tristan fell silent afterwards and tried seeing what such a code meant for the supernatural community. While he would agree that the code was moral and upright, and even something that was necessary to be set in place, at least to a certain extent, he also knew fully well that not everybody would be happy with such a code, as traditions seem to lack importance with every new generation. Just like in the rare case that a beta would betray their pack and become branded as an omega, so also and more easily, can a few hunters disagree with their code and go off on their own, or commit some heinous deeds in secret without the knowledge of their family. Before I forget, you mentioned the hunting family that had been in Beacon Hills and just moved back. What's their name? They are called Argent, a French word for silver, mimicking and taking on the weakness of a werewolf for their name. They've been around since forever. I'll advise you to keep your distance should you meet anyone with that name. Elias' words suddenly seemed to have gained weight as they entered Tristan's ears, making him almost curse out loud. He clearly remembered what she said about the origin of her family name, but there was no way he could have known what it meant in a more literal sense. Tristan. Elias' inquisitive voice carried a worried edge to it, which reminded the young boy that he was still on the phone. I think we might have messed up big time, Elias. A groan escaped his throat. What happened, son? A girl, Malia's friend. She transferred in the same time we did. Her name is Argent. He felt as if a bile was stuck in his throat. Only the steady breathing of two people could be heard between the lines as unknown thoughts went through their heads. Malia. Was she hurt in any way at all? Tristan shivered as he heard the growl coming from Elias that indicated that depending on his answers, a lot of things could go wrong really fast. No. I haven't smelled anything wrong from Allison either. They've been hanging out with each other for the past few days. Just normal girl fun. Tristan said slowly, and in his mind played all the memories from the past few days since he met the girl on that very first day. It doesn't matter. An Argent is an Argent. They are trained that way from young, especially their women. I'll have to talk to Satomi after this. If Derek is the alpha, then his aim is probably to wipe out the Argents or die trying. If it were someone else, I wouldn't have bothered so much with their feud, but Satomi had been good friends with Talia. I don't know what her decision will be, but I reckon she wouldn't want to get involved. Derek is no longer a little child. If he truly is going to war with the Argents, then he should at least know how fierce their retaliation will be. Elias managed to calm himself down as his voice once again lost its edge and went back to that of a neighborhood grandpa. I'll keep an eye on Allison. That'll be way easier since I'm sure she doesn't know my affiliation. But Elias, if she so much as raise a hand against Malia. He didn't finish his sentence, but the intensity of his eyes and his deformed voice gave away his intention. Do try to exercise caution, Tristan. and try reaching Satomi as soon as you can." He didn't affirm Tristan's intentions, nor did he deny them, only suggesting that he talked with Satomi. "You shouldn't have to worry as much though. As far as I know, it is only the immediate Argent family that are in Beacon Hills, and I haven't heard any news about him being back," Elias said. "Who's that?" Tristan asked. Elias exhaled from tiredness and continued. "Gerard. He's from the older generation, so he doesn't move around that much, and he is pretty extreme in his hate for werewolves." After exchanging a few less important talks, he hung up and absent-mindedly worked on the croquettes he decided to make as sides for the oyakodon he was making. Satomi definitely had an influence on the type of meals he enjoyed. He'll just have to wait until Malia comes back before breaking it to her. Sigh. Who knows how she will react? Probably violently. Maybe a little hurt. Well, if that happened, he'll just have another reason for wanting to rip out the pale girl's heart. Derek Hale drove his car to the ruins of where their family house once proudly stood, casting its shadow all over Beacon Hills. How quickly things had changed. First, his family had burned to death in a fire save for his uncle and closest confidant, Peter, leaving only him and his elder sister Laura, who were fortunate to be at school during the incident, to move away from Beacon Hills and hide. They had been doing that for years until a few months ago when they saw the picture of the spiral that was sent to Laura's mail. Despite not wanting to, she had left to investigate it only for them to lose contact. Fearing the worst, Derek came back to Beacon Hills and was welcomed with the dead body of his last family member killed by an unknown werewolf who was presumably the new Alpha, and as if that wasn't enough, she was cut in half post-mortem by Argent hunters. At that point, he no longer knew what to do. He didn't cry because the guilt from the death of his family had dried up any tears he could shed. What he needed to do now was get in contact with the Alpha and find out why he was going around and killing people, drawing even more focus from the Argents. Maybe by a stroke of pity the world had on him, he was able to find the new Alpha's bait of the day after he buried his sister's other half and had been keeping an eye on him since, hoping to catch on to any trail that the Alpha left behind, but so far no luck, and worst of all, he had to babysit the self-important and stupidly naive Beta. He's seen the Argent girl on one of his visits to keep an eye on Scott, and if his nose didn't lie to him, her friend was definitely a word-type supernatural, while the boy was probably something else. Unfortunately for them, the Argent girl already had them in their targets, and he can't risk himself further by being out in the sights of Argents. One thing Derek knew for sure was that when this was over, one way or the other, he would surely get his revenge. When Malia got home, she was met with the rigid face of Tristan and a neatly packed dirt of broken plates and spilled ingredients. "I spoke to Elias." Tristan started. Malia nodded and dropped her bag on the couch before making her way to Tristan by the kitchen pillar. "We talked for quite some time. He's doing well, by the way." She only hummed and took his hands and brought them close to her face, only dropping them when noticing they lacked the smell of his blood. Leaning forward, she kissed him on the lips, her expression light. "Then I'm glad." It was unknown what she meant by that, but Tristan nodded. He let her drag him to the couch and didn't resist when she brought his head to her laps. "We think we know who the Alpha is and why he's killing. You've heard of that fire, right? The one that happened a couple years ago?" he asked. "The one where the family all burned." The story of the Hales dying in a fire was an event that basically everyone around this part knew. Turns out not all of them died. Their Alpha's son is alive. Tristan's breath faltered as she brushed a part of his head, making him shiver in pleasure. She asked, "He's McCall's Alpha?" Tristan slowly shook his head. "Something about it just doesn't seem right, but yeah, that's what the general consensus is." "But that's not why you flipped, is it? Something else happened. What is it?" she asked. Having known him for how long she did, she had a good knowledge of things that both irritates and pisses him off. "I found out the name of the Hunter family that once used to live in Beacon and came back. Argents." At the mention of Allison's name, Malia shook in her place, something Tristan felt too well. It was taking everything he had in him to stop himself from going to Allison and sinking his fangs in her neck. "So she's one of them, huh?" She didn't bother asking him if he was sure. There was absolutely no reason to do so. "So she's what, trying to hunt us?" "Quite possibly. I don't want to believe that it was just a coincidence that she just gravitated towards us." It was too much of a freak coincidence for him to believe otherwise, but even with knowing that, there was no way they could confront her about it without tipping her off. It could be though. I don't think she's some murder-happy little girl like what we've heard about the hunters," Malia stated, causing Tristan to look at her as if she was serious. "I don't think it matters what she is. She was born into a hunter family. There is no way she isn't involved in all of that," Tristan retorted. "Then we can just ask her when we see each other and know whether she's lying or not." She shrugged as if it wasn't such a big deal. "Even if she lies, either way we'll know something is up." Tristan remained silent for a few seconds before asking, "So I'll be the one killing her then, right? If she's really one backstabbing bitch, then why not?" Malia chuckled. Their conversation resembled nothing a pair from a Buddhist pact would engage in. They were all for practicing inner peace and all that, but to hell with it when one of them was threatened. Even though they both laughed about it, they knew fully well that should Allison really be targeting them, then they'd have to kill her, no question asked. For Tristan, it was very well in his blood, and for Malia, she was as wild as a rabid coyote. They were more animalistic than normal werewolves. The next day, Allison had reserved seats for her two friends in the cafeteria, and was quite in a good mood since she managed to talk to the boy who had bumped into her the other day. If she were to be really honest with herself, he looked kinda cute with the way he was fidgeting. "Hey guys. Over here." She waved at them as she spotted them coming into the cafeteria at the same time, like always. She also saw Scott walking into the cafeteria with his friend, and as if sensing her stare, turned around and waved at her with a goofy smile on his face, but stopped as he saw Malia and Tristan making their way towards her. Maybe she should introduce them. Probably Tristan because he lacked a male friend, or doesn't spend time with any of them as far as she knew. Then again, neither had Malia. "Don't they have any other friends apart from me?" she thought. Whatever. She threw that thought away as they both got to her with Tristan nodding at her like always as he took his seat on her left as opposed to opposite her like he always used to do, while Malia was on her right. Nothing strange there. Before she could say anything, Malia opened up the conversation with something she never would have expected. "We're werewolves. Are you going to kill us?" Somewhere in the cafeteria, Scott spat out the juice he was drinking on Styles' body, earning a hurt and confused expression from his friend. Allison, on the other hand, looked as if she didn't understand what Malia was talking about. "Is that some sort of game reference I'm supposed to get?" She twisted her lips in a cute way that showed her confusion. "Yeah, just answer." Malia nodded and prodded her for an answer. Across the cafeteria, Scott's senses were immediately alarmed as he felt as if Allison was in danger, despite not knowing how. "Scott, what's wrong? Why are you acting so spooked?" Styles forgot Scott's injustice against him and asked as he saw him breathing heavily. "I think they're going to kill Allison," Scott whispered in alarm. "Who?" Scott immediately hushed Styles with a hand over his mouth to bring his voice down. "Who?" "Them." Styles eyed the two students sitting beside the oblivious Allison. "They're werewolves." Everything was proceeding too fast that left Scott out of a few loops. First of all, how come he'd never noticed anything weird from them? Styles became more confused. "Wait, Tristan and Malia?" At Allison's table, ignorant of the danger surrounding her literally on both sides, she nodded. "Well, if both of you are monstrous werewolves who kill innocent people, then, yeah, I guess. Wait, what game is this anyway, D&D?" The both of them stared at her, Malia directly while Tristan with a side eye, before he steadily removed his hands from her back and retracting his claws. Well, that was a surprise. Malia muttered under her breath with Allison in hearing distance. "Were you guys playing some kind of monster versus hunter-themed game?" Allison asked. She really didn't like being out of the loop concerning her friends. Yeah, and believe it or not, things really could have gotten bloody. Tristan chuckled to himself. "Wow, didn't know you could crack a joke." She nudged him at the side. "That reminds me, I've been meaning to ask, but for some reason I keep forgetting. Are you guys, like, dating each other or something? Childhood best friends, maybe?" "Huh. I mean, you guys sometimes give off these sibling vibes, and other times it's just like, clear the room for two. And besides, you guys live together, so there's still that." She looked at the both of them, not understanding why they were giving her that specific stare. "I thought it was obvious with how long you've known us." Malia quirked her brow. Allison broiled her eyes with sarcasm. "Well, sorry for not reading whatever ambiguous relationship between you both." Tristan answered. "It's a whole lot of both." He didn't seem averse in hiding that fact. It wasn't like they ever tried to hide it from anyone in the beginning. Okay. Anyway, you guys remember that lacrosse player, the one that caught all the shots on opening day? She diverted the conversation back to the initial topic she wanted to bring up. McCall. The mutt. Allison rolled her eyes. He's not a dog, Malia. I would admit he is cute though. Whatever, he invited me to their next game and we're going. Tristan stood up from the table and left since they already confirmed what they wanted from Allison, and he trusted Malia to keep an eye on her. He had something else to do. Walking out of the cafeteria, he ignored the looks Scott and Styles gave him, knowing that the werewolf had been eavesdropping on their conversation. Watching Tristan leave, Styles turned to Scott. So we just confirmed that werewolves are pretty much crazy if they really wanted to kill their friend in the middle of the day. What are we going to do with them? Scott looked at him confused. What are we supposed to do? Styles shook his head in mock pity. You are so lost without me. We don't know if they're Derek's or belong to someone else. So we ask them, idiot. We know they're werewolves, so what is there to fear? Who knows, maybe they can give you some tips on how to control the shift. Styles hypothesized. They just tried to kill someone, Styles. And you do know that the only werewolves we've seen are clearly the murderous type, right? Scott chided Styles for what he saw as lack of common sense. Well, you're going to need to do something, and do it fast if you want to play the game. Styles' normal goofy expression was gone, and was replaced by the seldom seriousness he ever held. You're on a clock, Scott. The less you have to rely on Derek, the better. There's a lot more going on in your side of the world, and we need any kind of help we can get. Styles naturally feared the worst for his best friend, one where he would be forced to kill by the order of someone stronger than him, and if anything he's read was helpful in any way, a werewolf like Scott disobeying the orders of his alpha could end very badly. It was way better to talk to someone their age, even if they were evil, than let Derek dictate what Scott could and couldn't do. Seeing Styles' urgency, Scott became even more tired. Derek already told him he couldn't play, and even if he really wanted, he couldn't deny that a lot of things could go wrong. Come on, let's go, he said dejectedly. Although Tristan's scent was harder to track, he was able to follow it to the boys' bathroom. That's not ominous at all. Not answering Styles, he pushed the door open and went in with Styles following behind. They saw Tristan washing his face at a sink, not concerning himself with their arrival. Hey there, man. I just he's a werewolf, like you. Styles immediately cut to the chase, ignoring Scott's stuttering speech. Not answering the both of them, Tristan washed his mouth and took a towel to clean his face. Still not observing their presence, he made his way to move out of the restroom, only to have Scott bar his way with a pleading expression. We just want to ask you some things, that's all. Styles supplemented. I got bit recently, and I don't know what to do. I'm constantly freaking out that I might kill someone if I lose my temper, and now I can't even play the game after making first line. I just need something, anything that can help me. Scott pleaded. From their entire conversation with Allison, he saw how neither of them seemed about to lose themselves, even though they probably wanted to kill her. You're alpha, was the only thing Tristan said in response to Scott's plea. Yeah, his alpha isn't that much of a good guy. Styles quipped off to the side. Eyes. Derek's eyes. What color? No matter what Tristan thought of it, it just didn't seem like such a good idea for Derek to announce his arrival back in Beacon Hills the way he did. Instead, he would have just started killing the Argents instead of tipping them off like that. Maybe it might have been a way to get them back to Beacon Hills, but something still felt off about the situation. I don't think he's ever showed me his eyes, but I think I saw them during the full moon. I think they were blue or something similar, not gold like mine. Scott stimulated his thoughts to remember the memory flashes of that night, and he recalled seeing a pair of blue eyes before he started pursuing him. What matters about his eye color? If it's blue, then he's not your alpha. Alphas are red, betas are gold. He left them with that and exited the restroom, leaving the occupants dumbfounded. Do you have any idea what that meant? Styles raised the question after they left the restroom. It means Derek wasn't the one who bit me. It's someone else. Everything was becoming more complicated the more he got deeper into it. What did he even mean by an alpha's eyes were red while a beta is gold? What does Derek's blue signify then? So we're back to square one? Finding the dude who bit you. Do you even think he knows you exist? Like, what if he's forgotten about you? Styles suggested. Who knows? Maybe he's gone around biting other people and couldn't give two shits about you. Scott finally lost it and shouted. This is not a joke, Styles. If anything, they just showed that werewolves don't have problems with killing people. Scott was hyperventilating. Styles shut up as he realized something else they both overlooked due to their insistence for help. Scott, wolves migrate in packs, right? What if, hear me out first, what if there's not just one alpha in Beacon Hills? If Malia and Tristan were not turned by the alpha that bit you, then doesn't that mean there's probably another, maybe even more? Scott's face became resolute as he pondered on Styles' words. I'm going to die, aren't I? He said it with absolute assurance, as if it was a guaranteed fact. Well, it could be worse. Styles muttered offhandedly, which earned him a blank stare from Scott. Much worse. Scott sighed at the complications. I don't even know what to do at this point. Honestly, to me you're doing quite fine. It's not as if a how-to-do-it manual came with being a werewolf. He said so in a bid to comfort Scott, at least not have him plunder into despair. That leaves me only one choice. I've got to talk to Derek. He announced, much to Styles' astounded expression. You want to meet Derek Hale? The Derek Hale, the one who promised to kill you if you play the game. Styles grabbed Scott's collar and shook him as if he just said the most stupid shit. At least he's the only one who might know who the alpha is. And besides, he is the reason I didn't kill anyone on the full moon. Styles was stumped at Scott's reasoning. If he were to choose which of the two presentable options he could go for, he'd go for the murdering pair than go for Derek. He would never admit it, but that guy scared his weaker man's spirit. Fine. But I'm going with you. You know, strength in numbers. He said with a tone of finality, as if he wasn't hearing any of Scott's dissuasion. Scott wondered if Styles would be of any use if Derek came on their butts, but decided not to say it. Tristan Hayes POV. I hate this place. My initial thoughts of coming to school were being able to relax without Satomi nagging at my back at every turn, but I've ended up being drawn to a quagmire of happenings that I'm constantly trying to extrapolate myself from. The first friend we made turned out to be the daughter of an ancient hunting family, with us only finding out recently. It was still quite early, but we still needed to keep an eye on Allison because we were able to find out a few things from Malia's questions. Either she was ignorant of her family ways, or she genuinely meant it when she said she wouldn't kill us if we were good werewolves. Next was Derek, McCall, and the revenge-filled alpha running about. Honestly, this didn't concern us in any way, but we still had to keep our ears open because we were quite close to an Argent after all. To be honest, Allison was more trouble than she was worth. No one said high school was going to be this stressful. We did manage to talk with our ghost of an alpha, and the advice she gave us was something we all expected. Try your best not to involve yourself. If they seek revenge, then let them exercise it. She never seems to change. Always playing spectator to everything happening. Hopefully this vendetta pass quickly and things return to normal, because the more it goes on, the more other parties and supernaturals are dragged in. Despite what happened between us and Allison, she still hung out with us during the day and drove home by herself after school. She asked about where we lived, but I won't be stupid enough to give her my home address when I still don't know what to do with her. Driving home, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched, and Malia noticed it too. Who do you think it is? I asked as I steered us off the main road. Someone. Fast. Definitely not a hunter. Probably a werewolf. She sniffed the air and gave me a reply. We only know of 3 werewolves: Scott, Derek, and the unidentified alpha. It can't be Scott, too sloppy to be this stealthy. It's either Derek or the alpha, probably the former. I stopped the car and we both got out. It was better we squashed anything going on than let them continue tailing us as if we were some kind of hunt. You're gonna come out or what, pal? Malia called out to a specific direction. We heard the bush rustling as a young man, quite rugged looking, made his way towards us, but stopping at an appropriate distance. I knew I smelt something different when I went to the school. You're not werewolves, are you? He asked with a little smile on his face, as that would fool anyone. What do you want from us, Derek? He chuckled. Nothing. I just want to know which pack you're from. Tell me that, and I'll leave. He shrugged his shoulders. So this was an interrogation. Depending on our affiliation, he might be forced to attack us, which I know will happen if the imperceptible tightening of his fists were any indication. Besides me, Malia was triggered and growled at him with her eyes alight and claws grown. He looked genuinely surprised as he saw Malia's eyes, and his smiling face changed as he looked at me with inquisitiveness. "What do you want from us, Derek?" I asked again. He took a quick look at Malia, but shook his head. "I just want to know who your alpha is. It'll determine if I have to get rough with you or not." Saying that, his eyes turned blue with a fierce intensity. "Intimidation like that won't work on me unless you were an alpha strong enough to contend with Satomi." Roar. Derek was faced with two pairs of blue eyes, and yet he didn't flinch, only looking at us challengingly as if daring us not to comply. We stared at each other with none of us giving an inch to Derek, who returned it with an intensity that matched the both of ours. Rather than a simple matter of stubbornness, it was us not wanting to look weak in front of a beta like us in any way. He was older than us by a few years, but that didn't give him the right to come and demand what he wanted from us, as if his authority was higher than ours. Supernaturals had their pride after all. Seeing us not acquiescing to his demand, he finally got off his high horse with the same smile on his face. "So how about it now? No need for this to get bloody for you guys." Even his words sounded infuriating, and I knew that he was doing this on purpose as he was this close to ticking off Malia. My eyes lost their intensity as I scratched my head. "Seriously, man, you would want to lay off trying to piss us off. It's not going to end well, for you that is." I double-tapped at Malia's shoulders to calm her down. "You're quite ballsy, Tristan. I like it. But you still haven't told me what I wanted to know." Great. Derek was as much of a hard head as the both of us were. Which means we won't be making any progress in this conversation if he doesn't stop antagonizing us. "And you're quite rude, you know? Acting all high and mighty." Malia spat. "It's called self-importance, kid. Something all adults have." He wasn't even trying to veil the insults he threw at us. "The Buddhist pack," I said, stunning him for a moment before he turned serious. "Prove it." I sighed under my breath and pulled up one of my sleeves up to my shoulders where a tattoo of 4 stacked ovals of decreasing size was drawn. He looked at the tattoo and nodded his head, his expression no longer holding the disregard it once held. "Well, sorry for that. Never thought I would have met members of the Buddhist pack upon my coming back. Not a pair as interesting as you both. Take care." He turned around to leave, but I was the one who stopped him this time. "What do you know about the Alpha and why he's killing?" "Why do you want to know? Your pack doesn't involve itself in conflicts not concerning it, right?" "We don't. It's a personal tic of mine, but I hate when something I don't know stalks my den. It makes me paranoid, and I end up doing things out of proportion when I'm paranoid. I don't know who he is. That's why I'm seeing if Scott can draw him out." He said that and left into the woods, disappearing from our senses with impressive speeds. I'm starting to think that this was not the high school experience everyone was talking about. Malia huffed as she sat on her seat. "Tell me about it. I don't know how many times I've had to talk." I groaned. During Derek's confrontation with Tristan and Malia, Scott and Styles went to the abandoned Hale house where the fire had happened to look for the soul Hale. "Derek! Derek! I want to talk to you." Scott called out, but he received no response, and his senses told him no one was inside the house. Maybe he's not around. I don't think he lives here anyway. Let's go, we'll try again another day. This place creeps me out. Styles said as he uncomfortably looked around, shivering from the dreary atmosphere around the house. Scott cursed at Derek's lack of appearance and turned around to leave, only for his nose to catch a weird smell. "Styles, hold up. I smell something." Hearing that, Styles looked around in panic. "Well, what is it?" "I don't know, it's this weird smell. I think it's coming from the back of the house." Styles brought up both hands in the air and looked at Scott as if asking, "What are you waiting for?" and walked around to the back of the house, seeing nothing but a clearing and a weird flower. "There's nothing here, Scott," he said. "I think it's buried under that flower." Scott said and pointed at the weird flower he was sure he had never seen before. "Now that you mention it, that flower does seem odd. Dash." Styles rushed to the flower and knelt down to observe it more. "Scott, I think this is wolfsbane." "And what the hell is that? Why should he care about a flower?" You really are hopeless without me." Shaking his head at Scott, he uprooted the flower only to find a rope bound to its root. Pulling on the rope, he started drawing on it, forming a spiral pattern on the ground. "Styles," Scott called out, looking at the ground with utter transfixion. The smell changed. "I smell dried blood. Is it what I think it is?" Unlike Scott's shocked expression, Styles was very happy at the morbid discovery. "Come on, let's go get some shovels." He pulled Scott towards where he packed his jeep so they could drive back and go bring back some shovels and dig up whatever or whoever Derek buried there. Unlike other days, Tristan was left at home today by Malia, who had taken the car because he said he was going to meet up with DeMarco. Malia taking the car was not something he had expected though. His talk with DeMarco wasn't anything serious, mainly to warn him and tell the others, those who didn't know, about the Argents and a few things he needed from the man. "If things continue at this pace, I might get fed up with school way sooner than later." It was taxing enough that he had to be around hot-blooded teenagers for the majority of the day and then be hit at every corner with raging pheromones. Unlike Malia, who had a very keen sense of smell, he was very receptive to emotions, intense ones. Meaning only he knew just how much sex went on during the day, even in the teacher's office. In fact, there was no spot in the school that wasn't used as a shabbowinking ground every other day. High school kids were just the worst. Unfortunately for Tristan, who had a very high sensitivity to blood due to his vampiric nature, he had to suffer overstimulation from what he felt every passing hour. There was even that one time when someone was being fingered during practicals. He always felt the need to kill someone, just drink them dry, every time he was subjected to their raw desires. The only single reason he hadn't blown a top was because he had Malia. The girl was a blessing to him in every single way he could think of. If there ever was a person who he would willingly rip out his heart for, it was her. From the first time he had recognized her as a girl, the bond between them grew thicker than what it once was. They had started as close friends, siblings in fact, always in each other's company that it was hard to spot one without the other. Though he was late to learn what the emotions he felt for her were called, he knew from day one that she was someone he didn't want to part with. Even when he was still a human, Malia never allowed anyone to bully him. Not that they would, but she was just that overprotective. She had once tried to kill Brett when the latter had thrown Tristan to the ground during one of their fights. He was her weak link, something she took immense pride in. Before their relationship became intimate, she always had this habit of biting him every now and then, mostly when they were trying to sleep. Obviously, he didn't do anything to stop it, since he just seemed receptive to anything concerning her. She had always been far stronger than him, holding enough power in her tiny arms to squeeze the life out of him, but when she held him, it was always with the softest and protective hold she could cover him with, even going as far resting his head on her chest so she could wrap more parts of him with her hands. It was also why when it came to things regarding him, even till present day, she always had the higher voice. He was hers and only hers to protect, she had said. And then puberty had hit both of them, which was conversely the time Satomi thought would be ideal for giving him the bite, transforming him into something entirely different from the werewolf everyone had expected. Puberty had cranked everything they felt for each other up to 11. Malia with her rabid tendencies, and Tristan with his new physiology and heightened emotions. Satomi and most of the older members of her pack had been put through the ringer when they had to take care and suppress two pubescent teens from lashing at anything and anyone who got on their nerves or ticked them off in the smallest ways. Unfortunately, their best efforts still yielded a casualty. All they needed to understand what had happened was Tristan coming back with Malia at his sides with his hands and mouth full of blood. His eyes glowing a haunting deep blue than what it had previously been. He had taken a life. Though it was something that they all frowned upon, none of them said a word as DeMarco and Brett separated his hands from Malia's and took him to the bathroom while Tierney and Lori took Malia. Not a single one of them had mentioned a word about that incident since that day to either of them, acting as if it never happened. Satomi had been the only one to attend to them and see if they were in need of any mental cleansing ritual, but surprisingly, while they both knew what happened, they also didn't seem too affected with it. It was then Satomi knew she had miscalculated. Malia was by nature very wild due to spending most of her childhood as an animal, and Tristan was someone who got turned into something way different than what anyone expected. His heightened bloodlust indicated one thing only: blood was a crucial sustenance for him. Surprisingly, it wasn't her who came up with an alternative, but Malia. Knowing the weight of what Tristan had done, she had demanded that he fed on her if he ever was overcome with his urge, stating with absolute confidence that she knew he wasn't strong enough to hurt her. Though the others had also volunteered to donate their blood, It was then Tristan's turn to reject it after drinking it a few times, resolving to drink only for Malia. This was also one of the reasons why he was naturally more withdrawn with humans. Not that he was afraid of hurting them, but because he found the temptation very irritating. Everything went back to normal after that incident. Well, not everything, as the pair finally hit their growth spurt. Being an adolescent vampiric species that was very receptive to intense emotions and hormones, the early stages of puberty had been a very trying time for Tristan. His emotions had been all over the place, and his lack of control made it much worse. Malia too wasn't left out, as she leaned more to her bestial side during puberty. With their emotions running haywire, both of them had latched onto the other as their only emotional pillar, heightening whatever bond they had to a level they never knew was possible. To be honest, none of them knew when they started having romantic and lustful thoughts for the other, since they had always been together, so none of the things they started doing at that moment seemed new or unusual. Kissing and the eventual groping was something that came very natural to them, with sex being the only thing that seemed new. For the longest time possible, Malia had guarded him from anything she felt was a threat, even after he became a vampire. Whether it was an imprint, like Satomi had said, was something that meant little to them. One thing they were sure of was that they loved each other as fiercely as they could, so dangerously that an imprint seemed too shallow to describe it. Without a shred of doubt, falling in love with Malia was probably the highlight of his life, and also the most important thing in his life. It was no wonder why he was always weak to her wishes and spontaneous whims, and also the reason why he was quick to show a reaction when anything happened around her. And staying at a school where the clueless beta of a murder-happy alpha was something that irked him, so much so that he was tempted with killing Scott. Hearing that Allison was the daughter of hunters was more than enough for him to claw at her throat. Her being best friends with Malia? That was something that rattled him. He had never wanted someone as dead as he wanted Allison, and yet he couldn't, for the simple reason that doing so without a cause was dragging the entire pack into a war against the Argents. Whether Allison was ignorant of her family ways, or she was keeping an eye on them, made him greatly paranoid that every moment he spent in her presence was like a sweet invitation to just paint her flesh red. I hate this. He arrived in school during break time, and the first person he met just happened to be Allison. Malia said you had something to take care of. Anything serious? Their locker just happened to be on the same row, much to his laments. MMMHM. All he could do was shake his head as he took out a few books and put them in his bag. Hey, so I was thinking maybe you would want to hang out with me and Malia? He stopped his walking for a bit and looked at her, his mind going through multiple likely scenarios. Don't look at me like that. You go home every day, and Malia told me you don't go out except for family matters, so no excuses. No matter how he looked at her and sieved over her expressions, heartbeat and blow flow, he just couldn't detect any hint of lies from her. The slight genuine worry that flashed through her eyes was also not hidden from him. I have the feeling you're reading too much into this. It'll be fun, I promise, as long as none of you make me feel like the tag-along. Okay, that did get a chuckle out of him. And besides, what's there not to accept? You get to spend the day with two gorgeous girls, so. Just maybe he could give her the benefit of the doubt. If she could spend the whole outing not trying to poison them or springing up any ambush, then fine. Yes. She gave a full-teeth smile as she succeeded in convincing him to hang out with her. It was just a small success, as she could clearly see that he really wanted to refuse, but it was a success nonetheless. Don't worry. I'll make sure you won't be able to keep that dead expression on your face for long. He said nothing else and walked away from her, only for him to run into someone else. Yeah, I'll just go. Styles moved around and walked past Tristan, almost shivering in fright when he saw the side-eye that was staring at him. Ignoring the frightened Styles, he continued on and found her surrounded by two girls who quickly bade her goodbye after seeing him approach. Grabbing her by the waist, he kissed her softly, melding himself in it as she reciprocated it enthusiastically by dragging his collars to bring his head down while deepening the kiss. After kissing for a few moments, they separated, not minding the students who saw them, and walked away as if nothing happened, which it did, at least from their point of view. They sat under a tree shade with Malia sitting on his laps and reclining backwards with one of his hands on her waist. Are you thirsty? She asked. He shook his head in refusal, but tightened his hold on her waist while holding a book in his other hand. Malia spoke. I don't think she wants to kill us. I asked her if her family hunts werewolves or if she's ever hunted a supernatural being, and she was genuinely confused. I don't think she knows. We're going out after the game. I told her to invite you along. I don't think school's so bad, you know. You're kinda right, he said. It wasn't that bad if they knew what to enjoy and how to enjoy it. Hey, kiss me again. She suddenly requested out of the blue, and Tristan acquiesced, taking her soft lips once again, not minding for a second who happened to see them. Let's try not to stress ourselves too much. I feel like I might accidentally kill someone if this continues, he said after they broke off their kiss, not knowing that they were being watched by someone. The night of the game arrived, and the students of both schools were ecstatic for different numbers of reasons. This was the first game of the year, and whoever won this first leg would gain a good starting momentum and high morale. Where is he? Allison asked as she came down from her dad's car and saw only Malia by the hallway with her dad tagging behind. Malia shrugged while tugging a few strands of hair behind her ear. No clue. I haven't seen him since a few hours ago. Her response and coordination were natural, as if nothing was out of place as she approached Allison and her father. What's good, Mr. Argent? She nodded at Chris Argent, who was slightly stunned at the casual way of greeting from a young girl, but remembering Allison's words, he just smiled back in a good-natured way and replied back. How are you doing, Malia, right? Yeah, and I guess I'm doing okay. Come on, let's get moving. Malia beckoned, then turned and started her walk to the stadium. Are you sure he's not gonna just decide to back out and stay at home? Allison was skeptic, but rightfully so based on what she knew of Tristan. Malia shook her head. He's definitely going to show up. Probably held up due to 1 or 2 complications, she said with confidence, because she knew that there was just no way he would leave her in the company of 2 hunters. Chris just tagged along the both of them with a soft look on his face as he watched his daughter's banter with her friend. This was the first time he was meeting the girl named Malia, and he could say her personality wasn't that bad. He would have to see this Tristan to make his final observation. The cheering of the hyper crowd entered their ears as the wide field came into their view. Chris whistled. That's quite the crowd. Well, it's lacrosse. It's the local sport. Everyone loves it for some reason. They were able to get a seat at the same time that Tristan arrived. The young man looked over the field for a few seconds before spotting Malia waving at him. He made his way towards them while keeping the man at Allison's side at the edge of his senses. You're almost late, Allison said as he came to them and sat at Malia's right side with Allison and her father on his right. Something came up. He directed his gaze at the man who was giving him an appraising look and nodded his head in greeting. Mr. Argent. Tristan. It was as if they came to a tacit understanding about how to address each other. The 2 girls with them only cringed as they suddenly realized that the 2 of them were more alike than they assumed, especially Allison. The game started with a high note and a couple of good passes from the opposite team while the crowd went wild with cheers. Do you ever think of trying out for lacrosse? Allison asked the boy who hadn't said a word since he arrived. Stress. Chris looked at the boy in interest, taking in how lacking in amusement, and was unaffected by the contagious crowd. You don't like sports? Tristan looked at him for a moment before shaking his head. Stress. He repeated, picking up on his very articulate and lacking word, and asked him, So you can play? Not caring for Chris' questioning, Tristan scratched the back of his head for a few seconds before shrugging. Probably. It's not that hard if you're fast and dexterous. Chris nodded in understanding, while inwardly finished the psyche profile he drew up for the 2. For Malia, he confirmed that Allison's words weren't just the usual compliment a child does in front of their parents to increase the favorability towards their friends. She was way too casual than any other teen he had seen. Tristan, on the other hand, was very interesting. The boy was genuinely uninterested in everything happening around him. High school boys like him, from what Chris knew, liked to show off with their impressive physique and were usually outgoing, even more so for someone good-looking like him. He hasn't even taken up to 3 glances at either Allison or him since he sat down. Chris, as a veteran hunter, was very drawn to people like these. Experience had shown him how resolute they could be in decision-making. Deciding to learn more about the 2 interesting friends his daughter had made, he glanced at Malia. What about you, Malia? Any hobbies or general likes? Allison looked between her father and Malia, wondering if she had something she liked that did not involve Tristan, but knowing her. Nah, I don't think so. Honestly, girls can be very difficult to understand, so I don't bother trying to know what normal girls like. I don't have any specific likes, but I hate boring things. Malia's reply made Allison feel conflicted while Chris became a little awkward since he had like zero experience when it came to what girls like and their behavior. Turns out werewolf hunting was less complicated than understanding girls. Teenage girls specifically. Allison is not that boring if you remove the fact that she looks like a Disney princess, so that's something good I think. She added. Allison appeared really flattered, while Chris just smiled like the nice dad he was. He didn't bother asking Tristan because he knew what the likely answer would be and just settled for watching the game. The game seemed evenly tied for the most part, with the other team pulling ahead every time Beacon Cyclones got a tally point. Why are they not passing to McCall? Malia asked as she observed the open player that had never gotten the ball since the game started. Now that you mention it. To anyone who focused a bit on Scott, it was pretty clear that he wasn't doing anything on the field despite being open all the time. Infighting. But that's stupid, right? He's a pretty good player, probably one of the best on the team. Allison was confused as she saw how lost Scott looked on the field. The three people besides her just shrugged. Chris because he couldn't care less about boys being boys, like inviting someone to the party and not giving them drink. Tristan and Malia because they just couldn't care less. Oh look, if it isn't Queen Bitch B. Malia's contempt-laced voice drew their attention to Lydia and some random girl holding up a sign that was cheering for the lacrosse captain. No one asked why Malia hated the girl because they didn't know the girl and couldn't be bothered to. I bet it's her boyfriend's handiwork that Scott is running around like a lost dog. She commented and let out a knowing chuckle as she saw Scott stumble as he ran. Unlike her, who gained sadistic pleasure from seeing Scott becoming increasingly frustrated, Tristan watched and listened to Scott's ragged breaths. If the boy made the foolish mistake of shifting and Chris caught notice of it, there was a very high possibility that he would end up dying. The game continued with the current status quo for a progressive, while before a pass to a fellow teammate was stolen by Scott, which caused an uproar, only for said uproar to increase when he delivered a successful strike of the ball to the net. The boy was learning the hard way, under pressure, and while it was good, it was also bad as he would hit his limit of tolerance and would likely mutilate anyone nearby at that ill-fated time. See, I told you he was good. Allison clapped as Scott scored his third goal of the night. She stuck out her tongue towards her father as if admonishing him for talking bad about Scott, making the inwardly exasperated while his face remained as passive as it had always been. You've been paying an awful lot of attention to McCall. You like him or something? Malia leaned on Tristan's knees and asked the pale girl teasingly, causing her to gain a light embarrassed blush since her dad and Tristan looked at her. She waved her hands hurriedly to stop whatever thoughts were going through their heads and hers. No. It's not that. I don't like him like that. It's just that we talked a little, and he's the only person I know apart from you guys. She explained, not knowing that the subject, who was playing his first ever game on the open field, had heard all what she said and felt his budding romance bubble burst before he could make another shot. Oblivious to the damage she had caused, she groaned as she saw Scott suffer a brutal tackle in front of the opponent's goalie. Unlike the ignorant Allison, Malia's smile crept upward as she finally saw something that amused her this night. She couldn't blame Allison for what she said and definitely won't blame McCall since he was already knee-deep in a quagmire of trouble. Trying to date a girl when he was barely a 2-week-old beta and couldn't control his emotions was just him signing up for a death sentence, since the one he'd kill would then be an ancient hunting family's sole granddaughter. Not to mention his alpha is still on the loose. It was better he got himself in order first and takes a break from stressful situations, lacrosse included. On the field, the refs blew the whistle and call for a foul and a first aid to be administered to the likely injured players. On seeing how things were playing out and knowing fully well that a hunter was on the field after learning about them from Derek, Stiles ran into the field straight for Scott, who was hunched up and groaning as his head felt like it was being hit with a sledgehammer. Hey, get up. Get up, buddy. Ignoring Scott's feeble resistance, Stiles propped him up and hung Scott's arm over his shoulder before dragging him off the field, ignoring the yell from his coach yelling at him to bring McCall's butt back to the field. Maybe there is something to like about lacrosse after all. Malia commented. Tristan looked at Stiles dragging Scott away for a moment and turned his head away. Being this close to hunters, he couldn't compound his problems and risk Malia's safety by trying to help a stubborn werewolf who refused to listen. The game's almost over. The whistle was blown to resume the game, but they were already in the final minutes and Beacon Hills was 2 points behind. It'd be luck if they equalize and score ahead at this point with how brutal and wild the opposition is getting. Pettiness will be the reason they lose, And luck if they win," Chris said as he watched the game enter its last minutes. Unfortunately for Beacon Cyclones, they lost to 1 point after they managed to equalize. The supporting crowd of Beacon Hills cursed and lamented at their loss, while those for the other team cheered and sang their victory song as they made their way out of the stadium. "Let's go." They walked out of the stadium through the halls and made their way to where they parked their cars. "Tristan, Malia, don't forget we're hanging out soon," Allison shouted as she got into her dad's car, while Chris just smiled at the duo. "Get home safe, kids." Seeing the Argents drive off, Tristan released a deep breath of air that deflated all his lungs. Staying so close to a veteran hunter like Christopher Argent was quite nerve-wracking. Cold sweat flowed down his back as he realized that they survived the night while staying out of Chris' radar. He wasn't that stupid to think that just because he was a supernatural he could subdue or kill the hunter if a scuffle had broken out. Werewolves ran from hunters for a reason. "You good there, Trist?" Malia asked with concern and rubbed his back. "Better." "They don't know, do they?" "No. Since he met us, he never once directed any negative emotion towards us. We're in the clear for now." A rare relieved smile crept on his face. "Allison. Probably ignorant. Then it's all good. Come on, let's go home. You're not sleeping early tonight, so get ready," she said suggestively and got inside the car with Tristan. "I totally agree." Two teens laid sprawled on the bed with disheveled hair and crumpled sheets with legs wrapped around each other. Different from the normal routine, Malia was the one who woke up first with a grunt due to her throbbing headache mixing with the early morning clarity, which produced a vertigo effect that sent her senses haywire. Looking at the peaceful sleeping form of Tristan, she smiled faintly and laid her head on his chest while running her fingers through pumped chest and abs. "We're gonna be late if you keep sleeping," she whispered, causing Tristan to stir, but he didn't wake up. Biting her bottom lips, she tore the skin a little and tasted her own blood before creeping up towards his face and capturing his lips in a slow kiss. If there was a way Tristan loved to be woken up, it was with Malia's blood in his mouth. It was something that stimulated him greatly, which was why he cautioned himself with the duration between each drink he got. "MHMN," Malia moaned into his mouth as she felt one of his hands on her, but, kneading the puddle of springy flesh while the other hand drew her closer. She chuckled at the way he shot his eyes open after tasting her blood. He could never have enough of her, and that was a fact they both knew. She was like a human-shaped bag of potent cocaine. Being addicted was the only end result. Their naked body wrapped the other as they twisted and turned on the bed, inadvertently throwing the sheets and pillows away. "Foa." They both exhaled a mouthful of air as they broke their rather intense kiss. Tristan went in for another kiss, only for his lips to be blocked by Malia's finger. "We still have school, remember?" Groan. "Haha." She laughed lightly at his frustrated face before getting off her straddling position, leaving her nude body bare for all to see. "Come on, we are on a clock." A smile was plastered on her face as she entered the bathroom, humming a happy tone to herself. The weekend had been fulfilling in every way she could imagine. Days and days on end with constant sex and light mutilations made her extremely pumped for the school week. She heard the bathroom door open as Tristan joined her as they washed off every evidence of the previous night from their body. Blood. That was the first thing that entered Tristan's nose as soon as they alighted their car in the school parking lot. Quite a lot of it. He frowned as the smell was very thick, which meant the victim was probably dead. Think he finally killed his best friend? Like always, her thoughts were very morbid. They both entered the school halls leisurely, paying little attention to the blood, and just followed the migrating students to where they were gathered. The place had been cordoned off by the authorities, but the blood was practically everywhere. "What are we going to do if he really did kill someone?" Malia asked as they turned and walked away from the congregation, only for them to run into Scott and Styles, with the former reeling back in shock while the latter was frozen in fright. I. Scott tried saying something, but only incoherent sentences were spewed forth. "If you killed someone, then be prepared, because chance is that you'll probably do it again, and again. Until you're put down by other werewolves or the hunters." Malia left the stricken duo with that, and followed along beside Tristan. "Any reason for doing that?" he asked. "Just wanted to tease him and give him a heads up." Tristan nodded before proceeding to stretch himself and letting out a yawn as he made his way to their class. Luckily, He and Malia had the same classes today, which meant he wouldn't be that bored. School hours went by, and so far the most notable thing that happened was that the man who was mauled didn't die, but Tristan and Malia both knew that it was only a matter of time before he died. It would take a monstrous will to live for him to be able to survive. Unlike what Scott might think, the two of them could feel it. An alpha. The apex predator was here. Rather than some random killings, this could be best described as a hunt. A very messy one. They didn't bother with Scott, nor did they answer the veiled calls he made to them. No matter how ballsy and callous they both were, none of them would want to get in the way of an alpha's time with his beta. Unfortunately for Scott, he would have to find his own way of repelling his alpha's call to hunt, which would most likely result in him dying. Inside a veterinary, Beacon Hills Animal Clinic, a middle-aged man is seen distributing food to the pets inside the small cages that stack the entire room. Alan Deaton is the owner of the animal clinic, and to everyone ignorant, he was the kind and soft-spoken veterinarian who took special care of all his animal patients. But to a very special few, an almost non-existent minority, he was something more. Something integral. "Is there anything wrong, Cole?" He asked a little pup and was sitting at the edge of the cage covering its face with its front legs. He frowned as the pets inside his clinic began going quiet and retreating into their cages as if to make themselves inconspicuous. Sighing as he realized the most likely cause, he went to a shelf and picked up a very small corked bottle with an engraved symbol on the cover and kept it inside his pocket just in time to hear the bell chime of a customer. He looked at the animals once again, and some were already whining in a pitiful way. Making his way to the front counter, he kept both of his hands inside his pockets in a natural way and prepared to meet his customer, only for him to be surprised at the identity of the person who definitely wasn't a customer. Elias. "Alan, how long has it been? Look how you've grown." The elderly man with a cane in his hands walked inside the clinic with a small smile on his face. "I've been living, fulfilled. Though I have to say it is quite rare and unexpected for the Buddhist pack to seek me out. Forgive me if I'm not sure how to feel," Deaton said as he stood behind his counter and looked at the old man in front of him. "Nothing of the sorts, Alan. I normally would never leave my abode, but this is about my precious cubs. Hope you understand." Elias flung the loose scarf across his neck, the grandfatherly smile never leaving his face. Deaton nodded softly at Elias' words. "I completely understand. That aside, I still don't know the reason for you to travel kilometers just to see me." He brought his hands out of his pockets and dropped the small bottle he had pocketed on the countertop. It was not a show of threat or aggression, but rather a sign of him willing to lend his hands if it was within his power. "The Argents have returned to Beacon County, and I believe I don't need to tell you the cause. I only need to know one thing. Do you know who the Alpha is? Any possible affiliations?" Elias immediately got to the point, since there was no need to skirt around it. He was an old man after all. Hearing Elias' questions, Deaton couldn't help but frown. This was starting to become a problem, but unfortunately it wasn't something he had a say in. "I have no knowledge of who the Alpha is, but I know he's a new one, having stolen the powers from Laura Hale. Other than that, I believe he has a grudge against the Argents." Elias scoffed at the last part of that sentence. "I don't have any information on his affiliations, or even if he has a standard pack, I'm afraid." Caressing his temples, Elias groaned and exhaled a breath of the cold air. "I see. Is there a possibility that another Hale survived that disaster?" he asked in a low voice. If there was someone the tragedy of that affected the most after from the surviving Hales, it was Deaton. He had been more than a friend to Talia. He was her confidant. The person she trusted the most. "Of that, I have no idea. I'm sorry, but it seems I won't be of help, Elias." Shaking his head, Elias waved it off. "You did what you could. I heard from my cubs that the Alpha's beta attends Beacon Hills with them. Scott McCall his name, I think. I think this is where I get out of your hair. A Michuofo." Greeting Deaton in the Buddhist way, Elias left the clinic. Standing alone in his clinic, Deaton rubbed his cleanly shaved head as things just became more complicated. "Argent's house, Chris Argentpiri." Opening a long box, I took out the two small boxes and opened them, smiling slightly at the unmistakable sheen they all had. Wolfsbane-laced silver bullet. The Alpha is clearly targeting us, since this was not the first person related to the Argents that had been attacked. Though Myers had excluded himself from active hunting due to his old age, it nevertheless took away from the fact that he was affiliated with the Argents. My heart stilled at the gnawing possibility that he even knows about Allison, not that he'll care if she was innocent. Taking out a few bullets from one of the boxes, I fitted them into a clip and slid it into my gun. Are you worried? Without turning to her, I brought out my other gun and fitted the other sets of bullets into it. I'm not worried, just concerned. Good. The animal is getting more active, and sooner or later he will make a mistake, and that mistake will be his undoing. My wife, Victoria, said exactly what was in my mind. Since he's specifically targeting us Argents, the only fate for him is to die when he's caught. No concessions. I called Kate. I frowned at the thought of having my sister back in Beacon Hills after the last debacle we had. Turning to face my wife, I said, I don't think it's such a good idea for her to be in Beacon Hills. Kate was unbridled in more than one ways. She held my face with both hands and shook her hand. It's always been the both of you, and you have to admit she's a nice addition to killing the alpha. The frown on my face became more prominent as she said that. Regardless of the addition of her help, she's too loose and goes off on her own. She has no respect for the code. But we don't need the code here, do we? It's either he dies or we do. These were the type of conversations I hated having with any member of my family. My wife, my father, and most especially Kate. What about Allison? I diverted the question and released myself from her grasp and closed the case of personal crafted bullets. She's doing better than we thought. You remember our promise, right? You'll have to tell her sooner or later. The sooner the better. You've protected her for too long, and that will be my choice. There's a lot of time for her to learn, and I will personally teach her when the time is right. With that said, I left the cellar/armory to begin my tracking. No matter how much I tried to protect her from this side of the world, I had no choice but to do as Victoria said. It will be Allison's turn to lead the Argent family after me, which means she has no choice on the matter. With those thoughts, I drove away to see I could get either of them. The beta or the alpha. Styles clacked away at his keyboard with full focus, taking short pauses to flip through one of the numerous files and folders scattered across his room. While the young man seemingly cared less about the severity of his actions, it nevertheless takes away from the fact that the majority of the folders in his room were stamped confidential. As the neutral delinquent he so proudly proclaimed himself to be, he felt no guilt about digging through his father's case files, whether public or private, to satiate his own curious thirst. The reason for his illegal research was no more than finding out what he could about the two other identified werewolves in the school, and so far he had only gotten a lead on one. Malia Tate. According to files he acquired, and also cross-referenced from the paper published at that time, Malia's old family were in an accident that killed all of them. While the media's story said it was an accident that resulted in the death of everyone involved and the disappearance of one daughter, his dad's report painted a clearer picture. Slash and bite marks. Presumably a wild animal's. His hand shook as he read the autopsy report and the focused images that were paired along with them, and then his dad's report and final conclusion of the case. In summary, the case was an open and shut as it was ascertained that it was a natural unfortunate accident that resulted in the death of the whole family, only for their corpse to be further desecrated by wild animals. But he knew. If his calculations were right, then that night had been a full moon. She killed her family. But something didn't add up. If she did kill her parents, then that meant that either her parents weren't werewolves or maybe it had really been an accident that triggered her shifting. But that would also mean her parents weren't werewolves, as they would have very well survived the accident if their 8-year-old daughter, since they would have had a more advanced healing than their daughter. He frowned at that thought and turned to his screen and logged into his father's digital record on the Beacon Hills Deputy County's website and filtered the arranged documents to a specific date and pulled out the family files since he knew it would take a long thing to pull it out of the disaster behind him. She's adopted? He thought. If she was adopted, then that meant it was likely that her newly adopted parents were humans and not werewolves. Unknowing of the fact that they were in fact adopting a young werewolf. He almost cursed but held himself and only banged the table. The girl could have been ignorant of her true nature as well as the parents, and it had turned into an unfortunate accident later down the line. A lot of factors were involved, but that didn't take from the fact that she might as well have partook in her family's death. Remembering the long list of random animal killings that happened when he was young, he wondered how many of them had really been animal attacks. Probably none. His brows creased even tighter as he looked at the only digital file he could find on the boy. Tristan Hayes. There were hardly any documents, public, private, or government issued on him despite him having lived in Beacon Hills. He couldn't access the hospital records, so there was no way to actually make sure. That didn't mean everything, since it was likely that he came from another town or state when he was young. It wasn't like the boy had to have any sort of accident or issue with authority that would have made them have a record of him. Despite that, it was already proven that those two were killers if Scott's words were correct. Was it inevitable that all werewolves were killers? Derek definitely was, he concluded internally, never a fan of how the bigger man made him easily scared. Sighing, he picked up the phone and rang the first number on the call logs. The call was picked after a few rings and a slightly winded voice spoke on the speaker. "I'm on my way, Stiles. You know I have work after this, right? Then get your furry but here as quick as possible. It's serious, man." "Fine. Give me a few minutes." The call was cut and let out another sigh. There were a lot of things none of them knew, and they obviously couldn't trust what Derek had to say, at least not everything. Derek had caught them when they were coming back with the shovels, and Stiles would swear in secrecy that the glare Derek gave them when he stood in front of the Jeep had sent his soul cold. Stiles was so sure that the clearly pissed-off werewolf had contemplated killing them right there. Thankfully, Scott had been able to divert his actions by mentioning the duo and what they said about the alpha, which left the broody and death-glary furry wolf to explain the werewolf hierarchy. Basically, at the top were the alphas, while at the bottom were the beta. A very concise and straightforward rank. The only thing that didn't fall under this was the omegas. Principally, an omega is a wolf that is not in any pack, be they alpha or beta. As long as a wolf doesn't identify with any pack, they are deemed omegas, which surprisingly was what Derek was. Maybe the omegas were those with blue eyes. Who knew? That at least was a similar link that connected them to Derek. It also turned out that, according to Derek, the alpha had been the one to kill Derek's sister. He obviously didn't fully believe that story, but he also didn't disregard it. "Stiles, I'm here. What is it?" Scott barged into Stiles' room only to freeze as he saw the scattered files. "Did you even bother taking a break?" Scott asked as he made his way inside the room. "No, but I've been looking through some of my dad's files and I found out something about the girl Malia that I think is important." He took a few papers along with the pictures and shoved them to Scott. 8 years ago, she lost her family in a car accident. He continued his narration as he saw the changes in Scott's face. She was the only survivor. And get this, it happened on a full moon. That caught Scott's attention, and not in a good way. The autopsy's report says they were also attacked by animals, probably after the accident happened. She was 8 when it happened, probably around 8 years old as well. Scott slumped on the bed with a resigned look on his face. "You think she did it?" "I think it's highly possible. And besides, she also disappeared after the accident and no one had seen her since. It could be another Malia Tate." "Seriously? Do you really think that?" "Fine, but so what? Why are you even looking into them?" "Because it was the only way I could find anything about them if there was. I also don't think what happened at school didn't shake you. And is knowing that going to help out in any way?" He sat up while throwing away the file. "Their past records don't mean anything. I will have to kill someone if whoever my alpha is wants me to. There have to be a way, right?" Stiles questioned rhetorically. "Well, Derek says only the alpha can make that decision." Sigh. The both fell silent as their thoughts took a depressive turn. There was nothing they could do, and that freaked them out. Scott more than Stiles, because he was the one who would be forced to become a killer. We could try asking Derek or them about how they can control shifting. Maybe learning that will let you resist the alpha. Stiles suggested. Scott looked at Stiles and shook his head in a dumbfounded manner. "Do you want them to kill us? We don't know anything about Malia and Tristan." "Then we'll just ask. If they wanted to kill you, then I think that they would have done that since the beginning. And they also didn't kill Allison Argent, so maybe they are reasonable." Stiles stressed. "And besides, maybe they could learn a little about werewolves from them. Still doesn't make me feel confident in asking them. They were about to kill someone in the middle of the day after all. They were scary," were Scott's honest thoughts. Stiles nodded as he thought Scott was saying something very true, but at least they were the same age. They continued talking with Stiles, taking occasional glances at a file that was dated around 3 years back. Malia Tate POV. She looked at the board and heaved a sigh of relief. This was one of the only few times in class that she wasn't plagued with anxiety by listening to what the teacher was saying. English language. Looking at the passage they were told to open to, she cross-referenced it with what was written on the board. Identify the consonants sounds associated with the underlined letters. I can do this. She psyched herself up and looked at one of the sentences, but felt her confidence dwindling at a slow but steady pace. But he knew. If his calculations were right, then that night had been a full moon. She killed her family. But something didn't add up. If she did kill her parents, then that meant that either her parents weren't werewolves or maybe it had really been an accident that triggered her shifting. But that would also mean her parents weren't werewolves, as they would have very well survived the accident if their 8-year-old daughter, since they would have had a more advanced healing than their daughter. He frowned at that thought and turned to his screen and logged into his father's digital record on the Beacon Hills Deputy County's website and filtered the arranged documents to a specific date and pulled out the family files since he knew it would take a long thing to pull it out of the disaster behind him. She's adopted? He thought. If she was adopted, then that meant it was likely that her newly adopted parents were humans and not werewolves. Unknowing of the fact that they were in fact adopting a young werewolf. He almost cursed but held himself and only banged the table. The girl could have been ignorant of her true nature as well as the parents, and it had turned into an unfortunate accident later down the line. A lot of factors were involved, but that didn't take from the fact that she might as well have partook in her family's death. Remembering the long list of random animal killings that happened when he was young, he wondered how many of them had really been animal attacks. Probably none. His brows creased even tighter as he looked at the only digital file he could find on the boy. Tristan Hayes. There were hardly any documents, public, private, or government issued on him despite him having lived in Beacon Hills. He couldn't access the hospital records, so there was no way to actually make sure. That didn't mean everything since it was likely that he came from another town or state when he was young. It wasn't like the boy had to have any sort of accident or issue with authority that would have made them have a record of him. Despite that, it was already proven that those two were killers if Scott's words were correct. Was it inevitable that all werewolves were killers? Derek definitely was, he concluded internally, never a fan of how the bigger man made him easily scared. Sighing, he picked up the phone and rang the first number on the call logs. The call was picked after a few rings and a slightly winded voice spoke on the speaker. I'm on my way, Stiles. You know I have work after this, right? Then get your furry, but here as quick as possible. It's serious, man. Fine. Give me a few minutes. The call was cut and let out another sigh. There were a lot of things none of them knew, and they obviously couldn't trust what Derek had to say, at least not everything. Derek had caught them when they were coming back with the shovels, and Stiles would swear in secrecy that the glare Derek gave them when he stood in front of the Jeep had sent his soul cold. Stiles was so sure that the clearly pissed-off werewolf had contemplated killing them right there. Thankfully, Scott had been able to divert his actions by mentioning the duo and what they said about the alpha, which left the broody and death-glary furry wolf to explain the werewolf hierarchy. Basically, at the top were the alphas, while at the bottom were the beta. A very concise and straightforward rank. The only thing that didn't fall under this was the omegas. Principally, an omega is a wolf that is not in any pack, be they alpha or beta. As long as a wolf doesn't identify with any pack, they are deemed omegas, which surprisingly was what Derek was. Maybe the omegas were those with blue eyes. Who knew? That at least was a similar link that connected them to Derek. It also turned out that, according to Derek, the alpha had been the one to kill Derek's sister. He obviously didn't fully believe that story, but he also didn't disregard it. Stiles, I'm here. What is it? Scott barged into Stiles' room only to freeze as he saw the scattered files. Did you even bother taking a break? Scott asked as he made his way inside the room. No, but I've been looking through some of my dad's files and I found out something about the girl Malia that I think is important. He took a few papers along with the pictures and shoved them to Scott. 8 years ago, she lost her family in a car accident. He continued his narration as he saw the changes in Scott's face. She was the only survivor. And get this, it happened on a full moon. That caught Scott's attention, and not in a good way. The autopsy's report says they were also attacked by animals, probably after the accident happened. She was 8 when it happened, probably around 8 years old as well. Scott slumped on the bed with a resigned look on his face. You think she did it? I think it's highly possible. And besides, She also disappeared after the accident, and no one had seen her since. It could be another Malia Tate. Seriously? Do you really think that? Fine, but so what? Why are you even looking into them? Because it was the only way I could find anything about them, if there was. I also don't think what happened at school didn't shake you. And is knowing that going to help out in any way? He sat up while throwing away the file. Their past records don't mean anything. I will have to kill someone if whoever my alpha is wants me to. There have to be a way, right? Styles questioned rhetorically. Well, Derek says only the alpha can make that decision. Sigh. The both fell silent as their thoughts took a depressive turn. There was nothing they could do, and that freaked them out. Scott more than Styles, because he was the one who would be forced to become a killer. We could try asking Derek or them about how they can control shifting. Maybe learning that will let you resist the alpha. Styles suggested. Scott looked at Styles and shook his head in a dumbfounded manner. Do you want them to kill us? We don't know anything about Malia and Tristan. Then we'll just ask. If they wanted to kill you, then I think that they would have done that since the beginning. And they also didn't kill Allison Argent, so maybe they are reasonable. Styles stressed. And besides, maybe they could learn a little about werewolves from them. Still doesn't make me feel confident in asking them. They were about to kill someone in the middle of the day after all. They were scary, were Scott's honest thoughts. Styles nodded as he thought Scott was saying something very true, but at least they were the same age. They continued talking with Styles, taking occasional glances at a file that was dated around 3 years back. Malia Tate POV. She looked at the board and heaved a sigh of relief. This was one of the only few times in class that she wasn't plagued with anxiety by listening to what the teacher was saying. English language. Looking at the passage they were told to open to, she cross-referenced it with what was written on the board. Identify the consonants sounds associated with the underlined letters. I can do this. She psyched herself up and looked at one of the sentences, but felt her confidence dwindling at a slow but steady pace. The Faculty of Law deals with the judiciary arm of government. Compared to the others, this was a relatively easy subject, and also one she decided it was imperative to do well. Since most of the subjects were alien to her, she resolved to do her best in the ones she was somewhat good at. She moved her fingers to circle one of the answer options, only to be stopped. Not that one. The last one. She looked at the smirking bitch bee and felt nothing more than sticking her pen through the sides of her mouth. Humph. The girl haughtily turned her head and focused back on her work. Malia grunted, but marked the last one as she was told. This doesn't mean anything, so why the smug look? She groaned as she heard the bitch chuckling. Om mani padme hum, she chanted to clear her mind of every low-energy thought. Lydia's face showed confusion as she heard the girl behind her chanting a bodhisattva mantra. She shook her head and let out a bored sigh as she sued her eyes to answer all the questions in seconds. Classes definitely were boring for those blessed with intelligence like her. She was already done with the syllables for the whole school year, and yet here she was, forced to undertake an assessment that she could and win her sleep. Sometimes she felt like keeping up this facade of the ditzy sexy airhead was very tiring, but it wasn't she could just give up. It was her life. Malia, on the other hand, managed to banish some of her negative thoughts and face the questions once again, only to be hit with a wave of uncertainty. She bit her lips and in contemplation for a moment before making a decision. Poke, poke. Lydia turned around and looked questioningly at the girl that poked her. She looked surprised and incomprehension as she saw Malia pouting at another question with a casual face as if she was expecting answers. Since you know them, tell me. She demanded in a way that left Lydia all too stunned to do anything else than nod absent-mindedly, before proceeding to point at the correct options while Malia circles them. You must be smart if you can easily answer them so quickly. As long as they're not wrong, that is. We'll be having problems if they are. Her words could have been construed as a bullying act, but the casualness just made it lack the forcefulness a bully would use. Lydia's surprise kept on increasing as she witnessed the shamelessness of the auburn-haired new girl. Today was a different flow from Tristan's usual school days, since for once he was seated with another person he didn't know before. They had met when they both picked the same table in the cafeteria. The boy had immediately wanted to leave, but Tristan had been too quick to speak. Sorry, wrong ta dash, don't worry. Oh, cool, I guess. They both sat down beside each other, which only served to lengthen the awkward atmosphere. Tristan had 3 juice boxes with him while his table mate had beans, sauce, and bread. One slurped while one ate, the silence comforting for one while unbearable and embarrassing for the other. Name's Boyd, by the way. It's, just forget it. Boyd sighed under his breath and just ate in silence, putting extra speed to his jaws as he chewed. Tristan. Tristan replied, seeing no reason why he shouldn't introduce himself when someone else did. Boyd looked surprised for a moment at Tristan's reply before nodding. Cool. He then fell silent again and began eating, this time at a normal pace. You knew? Boyd asked after a moment of both of them keeping quiet. Yeah. Ha. Got a thing. Nah. Boyd nodded his head, his face not leaving his plate as he asked Tristan some questions. Unlike what his bulging muscles might suggest, Boyd was very socially awkward. Talking to someone on his own initiative was something he hardly ever did, so he was thankful for the awkward silence that he was familiar with. He looked at Tristan for the first time after sitting down and noticed his lack of reaction as he just sloshed his juice away. He noticed that Tristan's muscles were just a level lower than his as they strained the sleeves he wore. Sports. No. Just a byproduct. Tristan shrugged as he saw what Boyd was hinting at. With nothing to say, they both relapsed back into silence, each understanding something. They had found a fellow brethren of the antisocial breed. Tristan had nothing to do since he knew he wouldn't be meeting either Malia or Allison, so he thought of passing the time here. Having free time, he thought of the news he heard that the man from the school bus yesterday had died to his wounds. He was sure Scott didn't kill the man since he couldn't sense anything different from the boy, so he was sure Scott hadn't lost his golden glow. The only good news that came out of everything was implementation of stricter curfew, which meant that they were not hanging with Allison anytime soon. If he had known at the beginning, it would have been easy to keep himself out of it, but knowing the Argent girl had changed all that. If this had just happened when they first met her, he and Malia could have simply kept their distance and let everything play out while they watched from the sidelines. Unfortunately for them, Allison had bonded with them quite quickly, and they could say with certainty she truly was someone they can call a friend. It was a complicated situation with Malia believing that Allison was ignorant of her family's ways. Tristan, even though he was mostly quiet, wasn't some unfeeling monster. If it came to it, he could cut contact with her or kill her if the situation demanded it, but they couldn't act now. As long as her father was ignorant of their existence, then maybe they could play along since they were trying to appear as normal as possible. I think I'll be going, Boyd said and stood up from his seat and took his empty tray with him. Later, was Tristan's offhand reply. We really got caught in the middle of it all. He breathed out. Derek, Argent, Alpha, Scott, animal attacks. They were involved one way or the other. For some reason, Satomi assured him that as long as he stayed out of the hunter's way, then he had nothing to worry about. Just hope you're right, Grandma. His thoughts were cut short as he felt 2 people walking towards him, pointing him to open his eyes. Without even saying anything, the 2 people, Scott and Styles, slid into the chairs on his opposite side. Can we talk to you? Scott asked as Tristan's eyes landed on them. He didn't know why, but Tristan gave him a very different feeling from Malia and Derek. It made him a little uncomfortable. Why? He responded. The shift. How do you guys control? Tristan's face at this moment was one of befuddlement. Please. Scott pleaded. I gotta learn how so I don't mistakenly kill someone. How do werewolves control shifting and staying human during the full moon? To say Scott was desperate was an understatement. The fear of killing someone and having hunters coming for his life was enough to worry ever-hardened soldiers, less alone a sophomore. An anchor. Or a moral line. He articulated each of his words slowly. I get a moral line, but what is an anchor? Styles asked immediately after, burning every word into his brain. Something he values more than anything else, or something he loves or is passionate about. I'm passionate about lacrosse. Tristan only stared dumbly at him while Styles kicked his best friend's leg to admonish him. It could be anything that calms you. A life decision, someone you love, your bottom line. An anchor can be anything. From people to places. Oh, that's great. I can be his anchor. Gotta love and not kill your best bud, Styles. Am I right or what? Styles raised his hand and waved it for a shake with a loony smile on his face, only to bring them down when he saw no one react. Tristan looked back at Scott. It takes time, but it works. The next thing I'll suggest is a mantra. Preferably something spiritual. Ha! Never expected werewolves to be spiritual. Styles' comment reached both their ears, but none reacted to it. It's mostly a pack thing. Tristan added. Styles and Scott both groaned as they heard that accursed word. To them a pack only meant one thing, which was killing with and for the alpha. Is there no other way? Something else? Scott asked desperately, only for him to be violently shot down. No. Meet your alpha. That was the only advice he could give, because sooner or later his alpha will come calling, and it's entirely possible that it'll end in someone dying. He got up and left the both of them at the table to dance through their thoughts. Well, this was a bust. Scott slumped dejectedly. Not completely, since he did give us a way to help your shift. Yoga practice and motivational quotes. Scott asked sarcastically. Styles brought his two hands up to show his ignorance on the subject too. Maybe you just need to think of something that calms you, anything. You need something to work as your anchor. Styles alluded to Tristan's words. Scott just picked himself off the table in a downcast mood and carried his bags. Come on, let's go. Picking his bags, they both left the cafeteria only to bump into two girls. Hey, watch it. Malia said with a frown on her face. Scott apologized while scratching his neck. Sorry. Sorry, it's nothing. Wait, before you go, have you seen Tristan? Malia asked after failing to find Tristan in their usual spot. He left. You just missed him. Styles answered while adjusting his bag nervously. Allison interjected at that moment, inadvertently drawing Scott's attention. Well, since he isn't here, we should just go for our next class. Maybe he's already there. Styles prodded Scott to move along, as he could tell they weren't needed anymore, and the way Scott gawked at Allison made him fearful of what Malia would do. While they left, Malia and Allison changed their direction and started walking as Malia opened up the conversation. Why didn't you talk to Scott? Allison looked confused at Malia's question, as if it was something she couldn't genuinely understand. I thought you said he was cute, and you kinda watched him for most of the game. Malia pointed out, which caused the girl to blush a little. That doesn't mean anything. It was just a fleeting thought. Allison said. That is still no reason why you didn't talk to him. Is it because I'm here? No, it's not you. She quickly refuted. She adjusted her beanie and clasped her hand behind her back. It's just that when we moved to Beacon Hills, I told myself that I didn't want to date so soon. Oh, I see. Malia surprisingly nodded with understanding. The most probable reason was due to the fact that they moved a lot, and she was tired of forming new bonds that she knew were temporary. Yeah. I'm still settling down, and I don't think throwing a boyfriend into all that seems like a good idea. Probably a good choice. Easy for you to say when you have Tristan. Allison said with an eye roll. I wonder how you guys even started dating. Malia was short of words as she heard that. Tristan and I didn't start dating or anything like that. We just grew into it. Like you just started kissing and stuff out of the blue? Yeah, something like that. We were pretty much twin siblings when we were young, so obviously we didn't know about romance or sex or anything like that. Until puberty came at least. Allison stumbled at Malia's words and how she could say all that with a straight face. Our family just left us to our own devices, only giving us the basic sex education and all that talk. We experimented on each other, liked it, and just continued. So yeah, he's more like my brother than anything else. Boyfriend is just his title in our relationship. They entered their class and went to their seats with Malia still speaking and Allison still listening. I don't know what it feels like to get a boyfriend, since I've never had one. And besides, I wouldn't trade him for anyone else. She said with such confidence that hurt Allison a little. Which girl doesn't want a relationship like this? One where they meant everything to each other, without anything coming in between. Malia stopped in her steps as her eyes narrowed with her face contorting in irritation. Why is that bitch be sitting with Tristan and bothering him? Venom dripped off her words as she glared at the flirty girl, scaring Allison in the process. Everyone settled down. The teacher walked inside the classroom and told them all to sit down, preventing Malia from walking over. Allison whispered to Malia as they both sat down. "What's with the violent reaction? Don't tell me you're jealous," she teased. The coyote snorted at the ridiculous claim. As if. "I'm just pissed at the gall she has to disturb Tristan with her irritating buzz." "Ms. Tate, I'd like your attention, please." The teacher called her out with a warning. Lydia, who saw this, just smiled and turned towards the boy beside her. "So Tristan, what do you do after school? I don't think I see you often." She had no reason for engaging in conversation, except maybe getting at Malia for publicly insulting her by ensnaring her boyfriend. "Nothing." Unfortunately, said boy's response was just a monotonous word that flowed with boredom. Really?" She feigned surprise and poked at his arms. "I thought you'd be into extreme activities." Her sultry voice and the beady eyes would have made a normal boy interested, but Tristan was anything but normal. "No." She nodded at his answers and continued the conversation regardless. "Why not try out for lacrosse? It'll really put those huge muscles to work." "No. I'll be hosting a party soon, you're invited." "Don't do parties." "You have a girlfriend?" "Yes. Malia." "Let's be friends, Tristan." She extended her hands, regaling herself in the scowl an angry Malia was sending her. Tristan looked at her for a second and shook her hands. As for Malia, she was free to do what she wanted with Lydia as long as she didn't brutally maim or kill her. He just hoped she'd stop talking soon and let him focus on the class. Malia had been fuming ever since she saw Lydia trying to wrap her fingers around Tristan, and while she knew Tristan couldn't be less bothered by it, she didn't like the idea of the girl getting closer to Tristan. She's always hated girls like Lydia since her childhood. "You're not going to say anything. She looks like she's out for blood, you know." Tristan just shrugged and continued with his assignments, choosing to do them in school rather than at home. Malia had gone to find Lydia and give her an earful while Allison kept him company, joining him in doing her assignments since it was better this way. "What were the both of you even talking about?" she asked curiously. Without looking up, Tristan answered. "Nothing. She did all the talking." He paused as he scribbled down some words only for him to strike it out as it turned out that it was wrong. Allison chuckled at the response she kind of expected. "Sounds self-conceited to me. Probably trying to get on Malia's nerves." She assumed. "I'm bored." She dropped her pen and whined, resting her head and hands on the desk as she looked at Tristan. "Are you bored?" "Yes," he said, still focusing on his work. "Well, since we can't hang out because my dad won't let me out after the curfew, how about you guys come to my place and let's hang out there?" she suggested. Tristan paused and contemplated her words, but shook his head. "Can't. Can't or you won't." Allison was no fool. She knew just how he hated meeting new people, but he was oddly more against it when it concerned hanging out with her in general. He repeated, "Can't." She sat up and stared at him intently. "And why is that? Is it that you don't like hanging out around me?" Her tone was guarded as she asked that question, showing just how hurt she would be depending on his answers. Tristan paused his writing and looked at her for a full second before continuing writing. "It's not that." "So what is it? Am I the problem?" "A little, but it's more your parents." She froze as he said that, and her thoughts started dancing around as she came to her own assumptions. "Is it because we sell firearms?" Tristan twisted his lips as she said that, but she completely misinterpreted it. "You're not comfortable around firearms? Trust me, my dad is not what you probably think he is." Tristan only grunted, all too happy that she came to her own conclusions and hoped she'd drop the invitation. "Okay, now you have to come to my house. My aunt just arrived, and I think you guys will click well with each other." Seeing the look he was giving her, she clarified. "She's more like my elder sister than an aunt, and also less broody and fun than my dad. Oh, and she can be quite a tease at times. All the more reason for me not to go then." A new hunter in town? Yeah, no way he was going there. He was trying his best to be very cautious because this was his first time being in the midst of hunters, and he didn't know how they operated. "Why not? I even told her about you and Malia." Allison gave a cute pout as he rejected her once again. Hearing her words, All Tristan's actions stopped as he looked at her with squinted brows. Why? His tone was a degree lower, but she didn't notice it. We were kind of talking about the friends I've made, and that is obviously you both. She explained while propping up her head with her hands. He nodded. I'm back. What did I miss? Malia walked into the empty classroom with a smile on her face. Please tell me you didn't get physical with her. A sense of uneasiness washed over Allison as she saw the bubbly expression on Malia's face. Well, I didn't lay a finger on her if you're wondering, but I was extra persuasive. Her tone sounded too smug for anyone's comfort as she sat down. So what were we talking about? Well, since I'm mostly bored at home, I thought of inviting you guys over since we can't hang out till late hours because of the curfew. But Tristan says he's not coming. Malia looked at Tristan with a questioning face that asked why not. You can't be serious. His eyes seemed to say as he returned Malia's stare. Though he was the one with a reduced sense of danger, Malia was the one who completely disregarded it. It'll be fun. It'll just be like going undercover. Tristan rolled his eyes at what she was insinuating while Allison watched in intrigue at their silent conversation. Before Tristan could reaffirm his choice, Malia beat him to it. We're coming. Allison cheered while Tristan just packed his bags to leave as he was done with his assignments. They left the school and entered their respective cars only for them to be stuck in a hold-up caused by none other than Styles with a pale-looking Derek Hale. Whoa, what's wrong with him? Malia asked as she opened the door to get a better look. His blood. It's some kind of poison. Probably wolfsbane. Tristan frowned as he sniffed the air and caught the faint smell of Derek's blood mixed with something else. He's dying. Styles and Scott rushed Derek inside Styles' Jeep and drove away, clearing the increasing line of held-up cars. The Argents got him. Malia stated, Do you have any way to survive that? I'm still weak against silver like most creatures of the night, but wolfsbane doesn't affect me like it does to you guys. Probably will make me dizzy for a while depending on the type, but that's it. Tristan said as they drove away. Derek being injured was the Argent's doing, which meant Scott will be implicated sooner or later once the Argent finds out about his connection with Derek. But he obviously can't get the antidote from them, so he'll probably die, right? Not entirely. He refuted. They can either suck away the poison from his body or burn it away. If it's too deep already, then they'll just have to cut out the infected part. Does Derek know that? Malia questioned. Maybe, maybe not. With Derek in Styles' Jeep, a hunter shot you? Bro, you look like death right now. Styles felt extremely queasy as he saw the pale skin of Derek and the black blood that was coming out of his orifices. Scott, what are we going to do with him? I suggest we dump him at the roadside. Scott reeled back in shock while Derek glared at Styles from the back seat. If I die, then there's nothing between you, the Alpha, and the Argents. Just know that if I die, you're dying too. Derek's words rendered Styles speechless at the not-so-veiled threat in his words. Wow. Just wow, dude. Nice persuasion tactics there. Not now, Styles. Scott looked at Derek through the rear view and winced at the poor state he was in. Is there any way we can get rid of the poison? Unless you know a way to get me a sample of the bullets I was shot with. Derek retorted sarcastically, irritating Styles so much so that he hit the brakes on the car. Okay, listen man. We're trying to save your life here, so how about laying off with the threats and sarcastic replies, huh? You're half dead already, and if I was you, I'd save all the smartass energy you're oozing. Finishing his piece, he started the car again and drove towards Scott's home since they had to stash Derek's decaying body at someplace. Feeling the palpable tension in the air, Scott tried to ease it by bringing them back to focus. We obviously can't get the bullets from the Argents, so what else can we try? He asked Derek. We either burn it out or cut the arm off. Derek's words sent a chill down Styles and Scott's spine. There's no need to be that extreme, right? Right. Styles was outright spooked. All that from just a bullet wound? Either that or I die. If the poison reaches my heart, then I'm dead. Those are the only options we have. They got to Scott's house and carried Derek in up to his room and dropped him on the bed. Styles rushed out of the room the next second, and after a few things falling down, he came back with a small gas canister and lit it up. So who's burning him up? He asked excitedly. Here. He shoved the canister into Scott and stood at the side of the room to watch the morbid action of a human burning another human. Scott just shook his head at his friend's antics and lit the gas up. Here goes nothing. At the Argents, Tristan and Malia arrived at the Argents just as an SUV pulled up to the garage with Chris and a young woman highlighting it. Tristan, Malia, what brings you guys here? Chris called out to them with a harmless smile on his face as he opened the boot of his car. Allison. Tristan gave a curt reply to which Chris nodded. Come help me with these. He beckoned at the both of them. This is my sister, Kate. Ho. So these are the friends Allison mentioned. She whistled as she saw Tristan. Looking good there, sport. They carried the foodstuffs into the kitchen, which alerted Allison, making her come down. I'm cooking. Kate said and shooed them all away from the kitchen, all except Tristan. Allison had mentioned how apathetic he usually was, and seeing the boy being true to her niece's observations just made her want to tease him and see his breaking point. She's always had a very mean, sadistic streak to her. You're helping me prepare. Can you cook? Seeing him nod and going ahead to wash the vegetables made her smirk. As they cooked, she made light conversations only to have him reply with a word or two. And here I thought that with that jacked body of yours, you'd be getting all the girls. Kind of a waste if you ask me. She slapped his biceps with a ladle and a small laugh. Don't need it. Ada. She cooed at his reply. I always forget how beautiful teenage love is. Don't worry, you'll understand when you grow up. She's always had a soft sadistic spot for the tall, handsome, jacked and broody type, but unfortunately Tristan was a little too young. She couldn't help but reminisce about her past with a particular broody wolf and laughed in nostalgia. So, what do you think of Allison? She asked casually, acting as if she didn't notice the stare the young man was giving her. She's nice. Is that a question or a compliment? Oh God. The boy just kept tickling her fancy. He was like a little lost puppy that only needed her to wrap her chains tightly around his neck. I'm asking for your honest opinions of my niece. She's nice. He repeated his former words, which earned him a snort from Kate. I know she's nice. What I meant is if you find her cute or hot. Personally, I think she's a mix of both. You'd be lucky to snag a girl like her. Tray, please. Their conversation continued as they kept cooking. I think there's hope of a crush forming if you play your cards right. Know what I mean? Sigh. Can you please stop this, Kate? The tired expression was gone from his face as he turned to her. I couldn't care less if she has a crush on me. There's no chance of anything happening between us. He meant every word he said, as there was no way he'd take a liking to Allison, not when he had Malia. Surprised at his strong reaction and seriousness, Kate's amusement shot through the roof as she sauntered towards him to tease him more, wanting more of his reactions. And what makes you think that? She drew her hands along his chest only for her to be surprised as her hand was caught by a strong grip and raised above her head. I won't say it again. Stop. He said with a tone of finality and let go of her hands and walked away from the kitchen. Kate just somehow got on his nerves in a way he didn't know how. He didn't see the wide smile that stretched across Kate's face as she was successful in drawing out his reactions. He's cute. You better snatch him up, Allison, or I might. Tristan left the kitchen and took some seconds to calm his rattled nerves. He was naturally on guard against the new hunter in the Argent, but something about her just ticked him off. Turning to the living room, he was about to make his way towards Allison's room when he was called. Hey kid. Let me guess, she teased you. He sat on a chair with a knowing expression. Ticked. He corrected. That too. He conceded. Beer. He extended the bottle to Tristan. He was surprisingly impressed when Tristan came forward and took a swing of the bottle. Most high schoolers in his place would have politely refused, but he didn't. For Tristan, he didn't mind taking a drink when he was sure that he didn't smell anything funny inside the bottle. Not to mention that things that worked on werewolves hardly had any effect on him. I almost thought you'd refuse. Chris said as he took the bottle from Tristan and took a drink. You offered. He said. Chris nodded at his answer. That I did. He added. Their conversation was cut short when Allison's mom Victoria arrived. Oh, hello Tristan. She smiled at the boy before turning to Chris. Where's Kate? Kitchen. Chris excused himself and left with Victoria, leaving Tristan alone in the living room. Seeing as there was nothing here, he looked at the bottom of the bottle, and only after noting that there was nothing did he take the last drink before going up to Allison's room. Oh, I know that look anywhere. She got on your nerves. The pale girl groaned in embarrassment as the awfully awkward scene of Kate teasing Tristan played in her head. I don't like her, Tristan said before falling on her bed, taking the room owner by surprise, and then just closed his eyes and took one of her pillows. If she's that bad, then I don't want to talk to her. Malia interjected only for Allison to jump to her aunt's defense. She's not that bad. She just doesn't know how to appreciate privacy. She tried convincing them, but none of them bought it. Luckily, they were called at that moment. Ladies and stud, tables topped. Kate's cheerful voice rang out, deepening Allison's embarrassment. Well, let's go. I'm hungry. Malia marched downstairs while Allison prodded Tristan to get up. They're calling us for dinner, let's go. Tristan groaned but picked himself up and followed her down to the dining table. Eating with Argents. Who knew such a thing was possible? The only reason why he would even entertain something like this was because Satomi had said that the Argents don't go after innocent supernaturals, which was evident to the fact that the Hales had let them stay in Beacon Hills, for however long that had lasted. Malia was already seated near Kate and was dishing her food, completely carefree of the fact that they were in the most dangerous place they've ever been in their life, when Tristan and Allison joined them. From a bystander's point of view, this looked like a wholesome dinner between family and friends. If only they knew of the fact that everybody on this table had taken a life, except Allison. Hey Trist. Kate's coy voice rang in his ears, making the distasteful expression on his face become more prominent. Knock it off, Kate. You can see how clearly unnerved he is by you. Victoria chided her sister-in-law sternly. Don't mind her, Tristan. Come, let's eat. Sitting at the far end of the table away from Kate with Chris, unknown to anyone at the table save for Malia, Tristan chanted a bodhisattva mantra to clear his mind, as being near Kate just made him uncomfortable in different ways, none positive in any way. Kate clicked her tongue in disappointment as she saw Tristan openly avoid her, then turned to focus on Malia, hoping to draw another reaction from him. So Malia, tell me about yourself. Tristan here was real broody and wouldn't answer any of my questions. Malia froze in surprise at the question, since her past was something only a few people knew, and if they were to ask around, it'll easily come out. She glanced at Tristan, only to see him calmly eating before he raised his head and gave her a confused look. Thankfully, no one paid attention to their little exchange. Well, I don't think there's much to say. Both our families known each other for years. She tried making it as natural as possible without answering anything. What about your parents? Victoria asked. Dead. I'm adopted. We both are. The bubbly atmosphere immediately turned heavy due to her words, and for the first time since Tristan met her, Kate's face showed another emotion apart from amusement. Victoria and Allison gasped at the reveal, with the latter covering her mouth in reflex while the former apologized. My dear, I'm so sorry for that. Nah, it's okay. She waved the apology off. She didn't need it from anyone, definitely not from a hunter. Happened when we were kids. Our new foster families are a pretty close-knit one, so we managed to get to know each other from there. Kate didn't ask any smart-ass question due to the glare Chris sent her way, so she surrendered. For now, that is. I have to say you're quite good, Tristan. How long have you been cooking? In a bid to alleviate the tense atmosphere, Allison started a light conversation as she tasted her serving of beef salad. A few years. He stopped his words as he corked open a bottle of beer, making Victoria and Kate surprised. I cook for us. Us? You mean you and Malia? You guys live together or something? Kate interjected. Malia nodded. We've practically been living together since we've known each other. It's not as weird as you guys think. She didn't mind telling them this since it wasn't anything of importance. In fact, she doubted they'd look into her story, since what kind of parents would look into the background of their daughter's friends? Oh. How frisky. Kate was beside herself with prime entertainment as she listened to Malia. The dinner continued on until Kate raised a question that outright killed the atmosphere. So Tristan, do you like Allison? Kate. Kate. Both Allison and Chris shouted her name. the former for making things ambiguous and putting Tristan in an awkward position, while the latter because she blatantly stepped out of line. Crunch. Malia's crunch echoed through the silence of the dining room. Not that much. She should learn when to leave me alone, Tristan said. Due to the palpable silence that was covering the room, his words became louder than normal, further stunning the residents of the Argent house. Another blunt reply. Gah. You're no fun. She acted as if she was disappointed and left that discussion alone after getting what she wanted. The rest of the dinner had been rather tame after the last expo, and after they were done, they bid their good night and left the Argents. Allison followed them outside and immediately apologized after she made sure no one was looking. I'm very sorry about that. Kate had no reason to do what she did, and she took it further with no regards for your comfort. Malia scowled as she remembered Kate's words. She was being bitchy. I don't like her one bit. That makes two of us. And like always, they were in perfect sync. Allison smiled wryly at their dislike for Kate, but she had admitted that Kate did pull a bitchy move. Yeah, guest dinner was a bust after all. She kicked a stone pebble absent-mindedly as she walked forward towards their car. I guess I'll see you tomorrow then. Bye. They drove away after saying their goodbyes, Malia, leaving Allison to stand alone outside on the cold night. She made to go back in only to halt her movements as she felt there was something lurking around. Hello? Is someone there? She called out again, but nobody answered, which made her sigh in relief as she entered her house. In the darkened road across the street, two pairs of red eyes glowed as it watched the young girl go back in before it disappeared. Huff huff. Crack. The woods remained silent except for the clattering of insects and tree dwellers. Whoosh. A deer leaped over a log and disappeared into the endless trees, bringing the forest back to its serene and natural quietness. Unfortunately, it was never meant to be. Two shadows whooshed with blinding speed that was clearly superhuman as they trailed their hunt. Far into the distance, the fleeing deer once more felt the overwhelming danger that provoked its flight response and strained its legs further to put more distance between it and whatever predator was on its hind. Got it. Tristan's eyes shone blue as he picked up the scent of his prey and ran in that direction, leaving only shadowy afterimages in his trail. Malia was a few steps behind, but wasn't lacking in momentum as she too had caught the scent of it. While she had better olfactory senses, Tristan was better in sniffing out blood and heightened emotions. This hunt of theirs was a game they played from time to time since Tristan became a vampire. They'll both choose a single prey and hunt it down in the fastest time. Tristan's eyes caught sight of the deer more than 100 meters away, and a bloodthirsty grin marred his lips. He could feel it caressing the bloody tip of his fangs. A successful hunt. Seeing Tristan entering his zone, Malia dropped on all fours and used all her limbs to propel herself forward with greater speed, overtaking Tristan as they got nearer to their prey. Cursing the fact that it was daytime, he growled and pushed himself forward, tallying his speed with Malia as their prey got ever so closer. 87 meters. 79 meters. The deer whined as it used all its energy to propel its legs, not bothering to look back because it knew only death was assured should it make that mistake. Not that its current situation was any good. 63 meters. 51 meters. 37 meters. Tristan's claws fleshed themselves out along with Malia's as they were a few steps to their prey. 22 meters. 11 meters. The deer whined fiercely as he felt that monster's weight behind it. Rarg. He lunged forward and sunk his claws and fangs into the sides and the nape of the deer, halting its movement with humanly impossible maneuvers as the ground to a stop. Malia slowed down and huffed as she saw Tristan winning the hunt and killing his prey. Ah! He dislodged himself from the deer with a bloody mouth and fierce blue eyes that painted a horrifying picture as he breathed in satisfaction. Enjoyed your kill? Malia pursed her lips in dissatisfaction as she was very close to winning that kill. Very. Tristan replied as he picked himself up along with the deer. They never wasted food. Everything had its use, and Satomi had taught them how to properly utilize everything around them, including their food. That puts the score at 129, 114. Malia noted, still not satisfied even though she had the higher win count. She was moody because the last 3 hunts had ended in her loss, this one making it 4. Come on, let's go. Lori and Brett should have arrived by now. Tristan turned around only to find himself alone in the middle of the forest as Malia had left him and returned. Talk about unfairness. He wiped his mouth and began walking back to their house, sometimes breaking into sprints to reduce the long distance. Hunting was a very therapeutic activity that they used to free their minds from stressful thoughts. Unfortunately, they lacked the time to indulge in it as they once did before they started Beacon Hills. For those wondering about Tristan's vampiric traits, like his weakness against silver mentioned 2 chapters ago and the effect of sunlight on him, his weakness against silver is not as apparent as you might think. Just like wolves, just because they are weak against silver doesn't mean that they can't touch it or anything like that. I mean, it's not as if Scott and Derek are deathly afraid of it throughout the series. The reason why silver is considered a weakness, I believe, is the way it is processed into weapons. A silver might hurt Tristan, but not to the extent a silver bullet would, as the later will be more poisonous. The same analogy applies to wolfsbane, mountain ash, and other weakness supernatural species have. They can touch it, but when it's processed into a weapon of attack, it completely changes. Some lore believe it's because of faith or something like that, but whatever, that's just how it is in this story. And as for the sunlight, the more Tristan goes without drinking blood, the more it becomes unbearable for him. He can stay a few days, but over a week, and he'll be suffering intense sunburn, 2 to 3 weeks, and he'll pretty much be the Ghost Rider, at least for now. He's still a fledgling if we are to go by vampire rank or whatever they call Lowry vampires. I hope this clears out a lot of confusion. Malia Tate POV. She looked at the marked test sheets on her hand and cringed hard at the bold F that was plastered in red at the top of it. She just couldn't understand why math was so hard. Remember, the parents-teacher meeting is to be held in a few days, so make sure you tell your parents to attend, or give a reason for absence. The teacher's gaze hovered over the class and paused a bit at a few specific students. And there are some of you special cases, so I hope your parents are in attendance. As if. Malia snorted at the teacher's words, since she knew her parents definitely weren't going to be in attendance. Elias might if he was aware, but there was no way she or Tristan was going to let him know. What of Satomi, you say? Malia would rather fail all her subjects than even let a whiff of the meeting reach her ears. She didn't care one bit about the teachers' meeting, so there was no need to fret over it. The ringing of the bell elated the depressed students and drove the teacher out of the class while they prepared to depart. Malia, wait up. Some girl called out to her and stuffed her cursed books inside her bag. She looked in the direction of the girl who called her and found her in the midst of 2 other girls. Since she wasn't in a hurry, she nodded and made her way over to them at the edge of the class. What's up? The girls looked at Malia and then looked at the girl in the middle in some sort of signal language. Experiencing a dose of betrayal from her friends, the girl rolled her eyes and said to Malia, "You and Tristan. Are you guys dating?" Yes. Malia nodded. Hearing Malia's quick and casual reply, the girl sighed in disappointment. I thought you guys were some sort of besties or something. Malia looked at them weirdly, since she was sure that her relationship with Tristan was not a secret matter. They've kissed quite a few times in the hallway, so anyone should have known if they asked around. Is that all? Then I'm going. Without waiting for them to reply, she walked out of the classroom. She had barely made it out of the classroom when she almost bumped into someone, but was quick to dodge due to her reflexes. Unfortunately for the other person, he didn't have an instantaneous reaction like Malia. Jackson Whitmore did not know how to react when the girl he almost bumped into by mistake spun a half circle and dodged him, causing him to smack the other side of the wall and groan in pain. Watch the hell where you go, his words halted to a stop as he got a good look at the girl he almost ran his mouth off at. What? You're gonna say something? She asked in a tone that dared him to, causing the prideful team captain to sew his mouth shut. Somehow, he felt some sort of apprehension towards the girl. And nothing. He turned around and left. His left hand ran up the nape of his neck as he felt a headache from the 4 puncture wounds he'd received from that Derek Hale bastard earlier on the day he'd crashed in front of Stalinsky's car. Malia ignored Jackson and went her way. She had to admit that high school was really boring the hell out of her. Can't something fun happen every once in a while? She walked past a class and couldn't help but twitch her lips, and she smelled the musk of sex basically oozing from despite the closed doors. One thing was certain, high school students sure were wild. It was as if the safety was turned off as soon as they left middle school. Cursing her sensitive nose, she ignored the faint clapping sounds that filtered out of the classroom and dragged herself further away from it. She walked towards the library, intent on trying to read some books and see what she could understand, but an intriguing conversation entered her hearing distance. Why wouldn't you want to join? Is it stress? You know, my nephew dealt with severe anxiety once. I told his dad to take him camping, Coach said to the perplexed Tristan. And he ditched him for 3 days. If Tristan was put off by the man's words, he didn't let it show on his face. Is it some sort of structural problem? I once couldn't get it standing for 6 months. I was this, he made a gesture of pinching 2 of his fingers together, this closer to being an eunuch. It was all or nothing for me. Malia laughed as she saw the slight shiver that passed through Tristan's body as he heard Coach's last sentence. Tristan shook his head in another attempt of rejection of the impassioned Coach's recruiting efforts. I'm sorry, Coach Finstock. I don't think I want to play lacrosse. Coach crossed his arms and looked at the cocky teenage boy with pursed lips. Then at least give me a reason, he said. Tristan sighed and wondered why he had to be stuck with this man, while Malia amused herself with his suffering. I might end up injuring someone. Seriously? Anger issues. Now Coach was looking at him with clear disdain, as if he couldn't be more pathetic. That's all the more reason to play lacrosse. All you have to do is direct that raging and burning feeling of pure unadulterated malice against your opponents. Problem solved. He clapped his hands as if he just solved a problem that should have been obvious. Critically, Tristan added. Hearing his words, Coach took a cautious look laced with curiosity at Tristan and whispered, How critical are we talking about? Permanently maimed. Coach reeled back in shock and asked, You're kidding, right? Hoping it would be some teenage lie or lame bragging. No. Good heavens. You're getting help. He might be crazy, but he wasn't stupid. Yes. Tristan lied. Having listened enough, Malia left them and made her way to the library that was just above the stairs. Going home after school hours, Malia declined the ride home, even Allison's, as she wanted to get a feel of running through the woods, and though Tristan wanted to join, he knew he couldn't since he had to drive the car home and get working on their dinner. Malia wasn't like him, who got most of his nutrients from her blood. She was more human than he was, which was why he took up cooking in the first place, to repay her. Cooking for Malia was one of the most important things he did on a daily, taking it as some sort of ordained task he couldn't skirt on. Malia couldn't help but take in a deep breath as she walked through the path that led further towards the preserve. If one were to compare the influence of both Tristan's and Malia's supernatural nature on them, Tristan would win on the bestial end while Malia was more animalistic. Being out in the wild was her comfort zone. She broke off into a sprint and couldn't help the grin that formed on her face as the wind aggressively opposed her motion with a gentle caress. There was such a thrilling sensation in just running through the huge trees and grass, but she had to admit that it would have been more fun if she was naked. There was nothing like letting the wind touch every part of your body as you ran at the speed of a car. Unfortunately, she couldn't do that during the day. She's done it a few times with Tristan, but he prefers running in the least amount of clothing, like just pants, than going through the forest on full commando. She pushed herself off the ground and swung herself further ahead with her unnatural reflexes and caught a branch, using it to do another backflip swing forward. Landing on one crouched knee, she wanted to break off into another run again, but the wind that blew right at that moment stopped her. It felt wrong. She focused her erratic senses around her and finally realized while the natural forest felt off. The animals. She couldn't sense any animals, not even birds, around her in any direction. Taking a deep breath of air, he finally understood the reason due to what she smelled. It's fear. She turned around and saw Derek standing a few meters away from her with a dead dog in his arms. The animals are fleeing the area since their natural instincts are warning them of an apex predator lurking around their home, he said as he took in deep breaths. Malia nodded at his words, since she too understood. It was also the reason why no same animal would tread around the den of a tiger or a pack of wolves. It's the alpha, isn't it? It was a rhetoric question, since they both knew the answer. And him? She asked, pointing at the dead dog the older werewolf was carrying. Probably ran away due to fear and ended up stampeded by a panicking herd of deers. He nodded and turned around to leave. Watching Derek leave, Malia sighed as her mood got ruined due to what was happening and started making her way through the forest to go home. It didn't take her long to get home with her speed and also the discomfort she felt as she spent more time in the forest. Walking through the door, the first thing she saw Tristan drinking her refrigerated blood from a chalice she had gotten him a year ago in amusement. What was a vampire without a chalice? You sure took your time. He noted. I was distracted. She simply replied and took the chalice from his hands. Please get me a drink. He left, but instead of going to the refrigerator, he went to their basement and came back after almost a minute with a small plastic packet that was filled with blood. His blood. Vampires weren't the only ones who feasted on humans. Werewolves, were coyotes, were lions, wendigos, and a host of other creatures preyed on humans. There was a reason why werewolves hunt after all. Malia didn't start to drink Tristan's blood out of some skewed form of love or trying to understand what he felt when drinking blood. She just did because it was a part of every night creature, and she had a very willing partner. Pouring it into a tin cup, he passed it to Malia, who gave him back his chalice. The forest was weird. You knew about it? Of course. How could the lack of prey and the stench of primal fear escape me? I'm afraid things will remain like this until the alpha calms down. She calmly accepted his words and took a drink from her cup and exhaled deeply at the euphoric feeling that vibrated through her body. She had tasted human blood, but she had to admit that Tristan's blood was a step above it in every way. She emptied the content of the cup and handed it over to Tristan and went to their room to take a bath. Looking at her reflection on the mirror in the bathroom, an image of an older her and Tristan briefly took her vision, but it quickly went away. She didn't need to worry because they had all the time in the world. Other than what she felt in the forest, there was also a feeling deep within her, a very personal one, that things were about to become hectic around here. Stop thinking of useless things. It's irritating me. She snickered at Tristan's shout, knowing that he probably might have smelt her feelings. She discarded her worries and turned on the faucet. No matter what happens, nothing was going to stop them from opening their weapons shop. I know some might be weirded out with the fact that Malia drank blood, and I just wanted to let you know that even the beta in the second season of the series ate someone's liver and kidneys. It was never said anywhere that werewolves don't drink blood or eat flesh, and Malia being a were-coyote doesn't make it any different. So yes, werewolves eat flesh just like vampires drink blood. And no, I'm making Malia have a craving for either. It's just something I dumped there for a little bit of controversy. Scott McCall's POV. Scott McCall opened his eyes and saw a very unfamiliar scenery of green and blue that clouded his hazy vision. His eyes shot wide open as his sleepy brain finally registered the weirdness of the situation. The trees were a dead giveaway that he was in a foreign place that was completely different from his room. Before he could take a step, images flashed through his mind with high intensity that made him groan in pain as a dizzy spell hit him. Those eyes. The haunting red eyes of his alpha surfaced in his fragmented memories, and with it came a wave of panic as he looked at himself, his face paling with every passing second. His pajama pants and whatever remained of his shirt were stained with large amounts of dried blood. He ran his fingers across his chest, a memory flashing through his mind that caused him to shiver in fear. He saw the shadowy figure of a huge monster swiping its clawed fingers across his chest, and then red clouded his vision. Even now he could feel a stinging feeling of pain underneath the surface of his skin. He sighed and looked around his environment and saw that he was near the bank of a stream. Getting back should be easy. He sure had a lot to do. Keeping his grades up, playing lacrosse, maybe get a girlfriend, trying to survive a murdering alpha, and maybe surviving another full moon. Ah, that's right. The meetings today. Talk about starting the day on a bad note. He took a few breaths and started running upstream to find his way home. Argent's house. We almost got one of them. Kate banged her hand against the cabinet. The three adults of the Argent family were in the kitchen after Allison left for school. Which one? Victoria asked as she washed the dishes. The beta. We couldn't get a clear glimpse of the alpha. Chris' tone was more sour as two of his men got injured, with one almost dying, when the alpha attacked. Kate scratched her head with irritation, as she was the one who lost sight of the beta and made him escape. I think the beta is a fairly new one. She voiced her thoughts, capturing the attention of the other two. Chris already shot the beta once, and our encounter yesterday makes me think that he's still getting used to being a werewolf. It could also be either an emotional outburst or he was influenced by his alpha. We've seen it happen countless times. Chris gave his opinion, but Kate shook her head. If that was so, then he would have been under the alpha's control, but his actions seemed erratic to me. She frowned as she tried remembering the beta's weird behavior. Didn't you also say you first came across the beta during a full moon? Victoria thought over Kate's words and couldn't help but agree with them. Kate's words are plausible. We've already established a probability that Derek Hale is not the only beta around. He doesn't even know who the alpha is. Chris didn't say anything, only tapping a rhythm on top of the cabinet. He remembered the first night he came across those two werewolves in the woods. That means Derek might also be seeking the alpha for affiliation, which is less likely since it killed his sister. Chris massaged his temples as his brain worked through scenarios and possible outcomes. From the beginning, our focus wasn't on Derek, but the alpha. We just need to sniff out the beta, or better still, have another beta do it for us. The two women's eyes gleamed as they clearly understood his intentions. Derek. Chris smiled. If he wants to meet the alpha or kill it, he'll have to go through the beta. He knows he can't kill the alpha along with the beta, so he'll have to cut the source of the alpha's strength. And all we need to do is follow his paw prints. Kate guffawed as the thought appealed to her. Then we'll need to find a starting point. We can't afford to alert Derek. He's turned too cautious. Victoria added. And Chris, don't forget Allison's teachers' meeting is later in the afternoon. She reminded her husband, who only hummed and walked out of the kitchen. General POV. In one of the male bathrooms in Beacon Hills, an intense stare-off went underway as Tristan leveled a half-glare at Scott, who had filled him into the bathroom immediately after he entered. Scott couldn't lie and say the boy in front of him didn't make him feel a bit weird. There was something strange about the air around the boy that threw him off, not to mention his faint scent that barely lingered in the room. Throwing those useless thoughts to the back of his head, Scott addressed Tristan and solicited for his favor. I need your help. Please hear me out first, please. He watched the expression loosen up a bit, and that gave him the green light to go ahead. I spoke with Derek, and he said he doesn't know if he'll be able to teach me how to control the shifting anytime soon. And can you please help me? I've been trying to find this anchor like you said, but it's not working. He was practically tugging on his last thread of hope. And Tristan repeated. Scott took in a deep breath and looked directly at Tristan's eyes, even against his better instincts, and asked his favor. Please teach me how to stay in control during the full moon. I. Scott's hand rubbed his chest as the memory of blood came back to him. I think I'm about to kill someone. I don't know what else to do. Tristan stared at Scott. Although he could understand Scott's plight, he also understood something more than Scott. The young pup was directly going against his alpha, and it was only going to end badly from his point of view. Though he had no reason to help, pointing Scott to the obvious direction once wouldn't necessarily cost him anything. The best way to control the shift is through anger. He ignored Scott's skeptic look and continued. The sequence is simple. All you have to do is factor in the consequences of you losing your temper, and while the anger won't disappear, you'll be able to redirect it towards something, preferably yourself. Scott looked confused for a moment before his eyes widened in understanding. Pain makes us human, right? Yes. While it's easier to use this method, it's also not very advisable, as you'll become more susceptible to anger and might start to lose control down the line. Think of it as a quick fix. It's only temporary. Scott nodded with a serious expression as he listened to what Tristan was saying. Now for demonstration. Wait, who? Before he could fully react to Tristan's, a fist slammed his face and threw him to the floor. Remember, focus less on the anger and more on the consequences. Your best friend might die. Scott groaned as his head felt dizzy from the blow, which he was sure broke his nose. Bomb. An agonizing grunt escaped his mouth as a kick made of bricks impacted his stomach and sent him tumbling back down. You might kill your best friend, Styles. You've tried it before, right? Well, this time I assure you he won't live through it. Tristan's words felt like thunder booming in Scott's ears as he fought to suppress the frustration and anger bubbling inside him. Maybe after Styles, you'll go after your parents. How do you think they'll feel when they find out that their son is nothing more than a monster in human skin? They'll call the authorities on you. That's if you don't kill them first. Tristan yanked Scott up by the collar and brought him to his face and gazed at the flickering golden ring around his eye. Maybe you'll kill a member of the team, maybe Jackson? You know he hates you after all. He headbutted Scott, breaking his nose further in the process. And then what? You'll probably never live a normal life till you die, either brought down by the hunters or the authorities. Slap. Scoot went into a daze at the slap before losing it completely. causing his entire face to change to a mutated form as his hair grew to a widow's peak with his non-existent sideburns growing out in moments. Hunched nose and droopy eye sockets that glowed gold. Tristan didn't look fazed a single bit at Scott's transformation, but brought him closer to his face instead. And do you know what caused all that? Scott was about to bite off Tristan's face before he jolted as a searing pain assaulted his nerves and brain. Crack! Tristan broke his left shoulder without any care, forcing the boy held by his hands to revert back to his human form. It's because you lost control. He released Scott and watched as the latter fell like a bag of cement to the ground, and walked over him to leave the bathroom. Scott whimpered as he held his dislocated shoulder and fought back to hold back his screams and tears. Damn it. He just couldn't. Tears pooled at the edge of his eyes and fell in a straight line as he struggled to lean against the wall for support. Leaving Scott in the bathroom, Tristan came across the semi-familiar face of Boyd. Both nodded at each other as a sign of greeting and started walking to their various directions. Should I try out for lacrosse? A bored thought filtered into his mind, but he shook it away. He didn't need to spend a few hours of his day huddling with boys and being on the receiving end of some stuck-up players. Right. He remembered that today was the meeting, which meant he could go home early since no one was coming. He brought out his phone and rang Malia rather than walking all over for her. I'll be going home early. Was all he needed to say for her to get the message. If she wanted to come with, then she'll say so, and if not, then that means she's hanging out with Allison. Thank goodness. Hold on a bit for me. It's Allison's birthday. She added. And? Tristan asked. Told you he'd say that. He heard Malia speaking to Allison, but ignored it for her reply. Anyway, I think I'll be with you in a couple of minutes, 30 to an hour max. He nodded and cut the call. Allison Argent POV. Why did he have to be an asshole about it? Allison pursed her lips in petty offense, but Malia just ignored her dramatics. I told you before. Tristan doesn't like celebrations of any kind. They were currently on their way from the library for some revision as they had time to burn. So he doesn't celebrate his birthday in any way? She asked. Though she didn't like her own birthday celebrations due to her being older than most people in her grade, that didn't mean she hated other birthday parties. We don't see a need to celebrate our birthday. Malia corrected. It's honestly childish. And as expected of someone with a low EQ like Malia, she completely disregarded Allison's feelings on the matter. Allison sighed and shrugged. I never thought of celebrating my birthday, but I thought we could just hang out. It's lonely for me since you both are the only people I know. Malia snorted at Allison's words, but made no comment on it. Well, you could hook up with one of the good-looking guys around for a spicy birthday. Allison was astounded at Malia's words, which only garnered a raised brow from the Coyote. Hey, don't look at me like that. I was just making a suggestion. Yeah, right. Allison rolled her eyes at Malia's casualness. I think I can think of something distracting than jumping on some random prick. With that, she walked ahead of Malia, ignoring the blunt girl. It was just a suggestion. Malia shook her head at the unreasonable behavior of some people. Today, Tristan and Malia were grocery shopping since their foodstuffs were running out quickly, which was not surprising when their huge appetite was taken into consideration. The principal had called them during the week to ask why their parents were absent from the parent-teacher conference, and the answers they gave were the same. They are on business leave. The principal couldn't hassle them more than he already did, and it wasn't their fault that their adoptive parents were out of town. They browsed through the shelves, checking out different items that they wanted to add to their list. Bacons. Malia asked as she held out 2 small boxes of bacon towards Tristan. Tristan shared a few looks between her and the box she held before he nodded. Bacons. Yes. She happily dropped both boxes in the cart and looked through more shelves for whatever could catch her interest, while Tristan just pushed the cart behind her. Ha! Malia stopped as she saw Tristan abruptly stop moving and looking around. What? Tristan frowned as a certain smell entered his nose. Can you smell that? Heeding his words, Malia focused on her smell, and immediately she caught the scent of what Tristan was smelling. It smells like dried blood. It's as if something is dying. She noted. He nodded at her words and pushed his cart towards the direction of the smell he perceived. They both followed the smell to another section of the supermarket where it was heavier, turning around a corner to find Jackson Whitmore sweating profusely as he supported himself against a pillar. Noticing that he was no longer alone, Jackson turned around and came across the two people he'd had a quarrel with on the first day of school. What? His reaction was strangely confrontational, but the two people didn't say anything and just kept staring as if they couldn't understand his words. Weirdos, he muttered as he turned around and left. Watching Jackson leave, the two of them looked confused as they couldn't understand what was happening to him. Jackson looked pale as if he had lost a lot of blood, yet that wasn't the case from what they could feel. It felt like something else was killing him, and whatever it was, wasn't something normal. Do you think it's poison? Malia asked. Tristan thought for a bit and nodded. It's something clearly poisonous to him, but I don't think it's something natural. The smell Jackson gave Tristan was very weird, and Tristan wouldn't lie and say the urge to kill Jackson didn't flash through his mind. It wasn't because he had some particular negative feelings towards the boy, but his instincts just told him to finish the prey. He shook those thoughts off his head. The wound is on the back of his neck. What do you think caused it? I don't know. He shook his head and decided to forget about it. Come on, let's go. Forgetting about the weirdly dying Jackson, they went back to continue the reason they came out today. Malia and Tristan had to walk to school today because their car refused to start. Fortunately for them, while the distance was quite far, it wasn't something that they couldn't walk through. They could have taken a cab, but none of them were that eager to get to school. Fortunately or unfortunately for them, they had ended up running late because of that. Quite the unique pair the two of you make considering you're both late. Mr. Hayes. Ms. Tate. Their chemistry teacher, Adrian Harris, commented as they both made their awkward entrance into an already filled and seated class. Might I know the reason? Not to mention, I specifically requested for both your parents' contacts. It wasn't a surprise, but none of them were particularly bright students, and as it was the norm for academically average students, science subjects were the hardest to pass. Car troubles. They both replied at the same time and walked straight towards their seat, expertly ignoring the other part of their teacher's sentence. Well then. Mr. Harris could only look at them stupidly before faking a cough and beginning his lectures. Tristan sat quietly on his seat, but had to turn around when he felt a gaze on him. Eep. The entire classroom fell silent and turned to face Styles, who had fallen off his chair. Hee. Don't mind me. He stood up awkwardly and waved his hands in embarrassment at the snickering and giggles at his expense. Carry on. Meet me after school for detention, Mr. Stalinsky. Mr. Harris's frigid voice silenced the classroom and made Styles' face turn pale. As for Tristan, he didn't do anything bad, did he? At the cafeteria, what was gradually becoming their favorite spot, Malia, Tristan and Allison sat at their table, but different from other times, someone else was awkwardly sitting with them. Boyd had been sitting alone, like he always did, minding his own business before Tristan had joined him. Due to their natural disposition, they were able to pass the time without any form of conversation or awkwardness. That was until Malia and Allison joined them. The two girls had been quite surprised to find Tristan sharing a table with a stranger, so naturally they had introduced themselves, forcing Boyd to do the same while Tristan remained quiet. I heard your car broke down this morning. I could give you guys a lift home. Allison suggested with a smile. Boyd, who Allison sat at his right, stiffened as his anxiety started building up at having a pretty girl like Allison sit beside him. And that smile. Oblivious to Boyd's plight, Allison continued pestering Tristan to drive them home. Though he refused her bluntly, Allison was well aware that he didn't do that out of rudeness or any sort of hate for her, but assumed that he was shy. So cute. If you don't want to ride with me, then I'll take Malia along. Tristan's eyes narrowed at her, but she huffed at his poor attempts at intimidation, her thoughts, by sticking out her tongue. Malia, who sat beside Tristan, just watched the two in amusement, since she knew exactly what type of thoughts were going through his head. Jokes aside though, my dad said we should stay away from the woods. Something supposedly making the animals behave out of habit. During the teachers' meet, a mountain lion had run into the school ground and had to be put down by Allison's father before it hurt anyone. That incident further solidified the claim of the random animal attacks that had been happening recently. It could be that a higher natural predator migrated to the woods. Boyd muttered uncertainly, but he was heard by everyone around the table, shifting their attention to him. What do you mean? Allison asked. Out of everyone, she was the most interested since something like this rarely, if ever, happened in the few places she's lived. Flustered by the attention heaped on him, Boyd tried his best to maintain a facade of calmness. You know how weaker animals tend not to go near stronger and wild animals, like a lion's pride for example. Seeing as they all earnestly nodded, Boyd felt a little confident and straightened his posture and continued. It's also the same way humans in the past would migrate from their settlement if they are constantly besieged by animal attacks, or even why weaker people tend not to get close to strong violent people. It's just my conjecture, but it could be that the reason the animals are scared and running around and attacking people is because something higher up the food chain invaded their habitat. It was pure conjecture on his part, but the others, especially Allison, had to admit that it held a lot of merit. But what can scare and drive away animals like mountain lions in a place such as Beacon Hills? Allison asked. Well, there are stronger territorial animals out there like tigers, lions, even cheetahs. Malia tapped her forehead as she thought of more animals. But this is Beacon Hills. Bears might be a probability, but do you think there are really tigers and lions around these parts? What about wolves? They are very migratory after all. Boyd interjected. There's also been rumors of people hearing wolves howling at night. Wolves? You think other animals would be scared of a few wolves? Allison asked in doubt. Boyd shook his head. Wolves hunt in packs. If they did migrate, it doesn't mean that it'll just be a single pack. And besides, they hunt a lot. Allison remained silent as she thought over Boyd's words, and there was also what her aunt had told her about their family. Allison. Her thoughts were broken off as Boyd called out to her, seeing as she was getting lost in her head. Sorry, something just came to my mind. She decided to think of that later and focus on what was more important now. So Tristan, are you going to walk home? Sadly for Allison, both Tristan and Malia opted for walking back home, but unlike whatever she thought, their reason for doing it was completely different. They both knew that Boyd was spot on with his theory, which was exactly why they decided to go through the woods. Style Stalinsky POV, you're pathetic. I couldn't help the smugness and contemptuous grin that slapped my face as I saw Scott writhing pathetically on the ground after he took a lacrosse ball to the nose. Easy for you to say when I'm the one who took a ball to the face. And there he goes complaining with the big gooey eyes like a puppy. You can heal, can't you? That doesn't mean it no longer hurts. He grumbled as he stood up while massaging his nose. What was that again? Pain makes you human? Yeah, that's it. I guess there is still hope for you to be human. I couldn't help but laugh at that unfair face he was making. Come on. We still have over 30 balls. I rolled over a ball into my stick and got ready for another shot. Remind me why we're doing this again? For you to be able to direct your anger through fear of the consequences, and target practice for me. It gets boring on the bench without you, you know. I couldn't help but reminisce about the old times. Sorry. Don't be. Life's unfair, I understand. I ignored the look he gave me and swung my stick with as much force as my knotted arms could muster. Ha. Arg. Yes. Whoa. Did you see that shot? That could make me first line, I tell you. I turned around for my mini celebration and saw Scott struggling to stand up with a busted lip. What? That one was good, right? There was no way that shot would have flopped on the big field. It was a master stroke. Scott gave me an irritated look. I feel like you're having too much fun. Well, duh. Everyone deals with stress in their own way, and I happen to deal with it the most on a daily basis because of your furry butt. I picked up another ball. So yes. This is therapeutic for it, so deal with it. For both of us. Arg. Let's just get this over with. He groaned, but his eyes shone with determination, and he prepared to receive another ball to his body. Ha. Hey, Scott. Do you think I'm attractive to gay people? Ha. Do you think Danny finds me attractive? I mean, I like girls, but I just want to know. Maybe that can be my plan B if I fail to get a girlfriend. SSDSDO-PAH. I don't think Lydia likes me that much. Maybe Malia? I think Tristan might kill me if I try that. You're not really helping me here, man. Roar. Oh boy. Sorry. Derek had been in a bad mood ever since he lost the Alpha, again, because of the interference of the hunters. That night he had heard the roar of the Alpha and unlike Scott, he could fight against the instinctual submission that washed over him due to the roar, and he had tracked them, but unfortunately he had been too slow as the hunters had beat him to it and had engaged the Alpha. Not that they had much success since one of them eventually ended up dying. Not only that, he had caught the two stupid teens red-handed one time with shovels wanting to dig open his sister's grave. If not for Scott's importance in leading him to the Alpha, he would have killed him, especially that worm he called his best friend. Especially that one. Visiting his last living family, if he could still be called alive, had worsened his mood further that he was becoming increasingly impatient. Finding himself back at square one, the grumpy Hale started looking from the only link to the Alpha he had and knew of, Scott. He watched the boy, his mother, the worm's father who was the sheriff, their friends at school, and anyone that they had some sort of connection with outside the school. Turns out the two of them were a pair of social outcasts with basically zero public presence outside their school. He had almost written Scott's bite off as pure coincidence, but then he found someone that was just suspicious in a lot of ways. The veterinarian Scott worked for. He didn't know why, but the man gave him a different feeling from any other person he's met, even the weird pair from the Buddhist pack. It was not a dangerous feeling or anything of the sort, but something fleeting. Though his mother was a very powerful Alpha, he was still ignorant of most things as he was just a young teenage boy when the accident happened. What made Alan Deaton more suspicious in his eyes was the fact that his sister had mentioned meeting a veterinarian she thought might know something. But then she had died before concluding anything solid. Making his mind up, he decided to visit Scott's boss to see if his suspicions were correct and if the man truly knew something. Walking inside the clinic, his mere presence silenced the small pups in cages as they shook in fear without him exerting any kind of influence over them. Deaton, who had been on a call, hung up as he heard someone enter his store and turned around to welcome them. If it had been anyone else, even Scott, they might have missed the small spike in heart rhythm that the man had upon seeing Derek, but Derek was not the average werewolf. "Can I help you?" "Hope so. I want to know about the animal you found with a spiral on its side." Deaton looked genuinely confused at Derek's question. "Excuse me? What animal?" Again. With his suspicions increasing, he held up a paper and showed the front page to Deaton. "You remember this? 3 months ago." Deaton's confusion cleared as he finally remembered the subject matter. "Oh, that? Yes. It's just a deer, and I didn't find it." He clarified. "They called me to ask if I've ever seen anything like that before." Derek had to admit that the veterinarian was very good in schooling his expressions, but he couldn't hide the minute vibrations of his heart. All this only served to increase Derek's suspicions as he moved closer. "What did you tell them?" he asked. "I told them no." Deaton took a step back as Derek came closer. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" "The sound of your heartbeat rising." "Excuse me." "It's the sound of you lying." Before Deaton could react, Derek reached across the table and grabbed his collar before slamming him against that iron table between them, knocking the man out with a slight cut. Not caring for his state, he found a cloth and bound the middle-aged man's hands and legs against a chair. He didn't mind the cut since he knew that it was harder to heal oneself when they were unconscious and experienced werewolves could control if they wanted to slow down their healing. He waited for over 10 minutes before the man started showing signs of waking up. "Are you protecting someone?" he asked as the man came to. Deaton tied up, tried turning to Derek who was behind him but couldn't because of his restraints and could only anxiously plead his safety. "I promise you. I don't know what you're talking about." Growing more impatient and irritated, Derek grabbed the chair and lifted it up with ease as he brought Deaton's face towards his. "I want to know why you're lying. Who are you protecting? What are you doing?" The door to the room opened, revealing a shocked Scott as he saw Derek lifting up his injured and bound boss. Feeling angry at the intrusion, he dropped Deaton, but not before knocking him out with a punch which jolted Scott back to what was happening as the young boy rushed towards Derek to stop him from hitting his boss further. "Stop! Stop! What the hell are you doing?" Scott shouted. "Look, when he's conscious, he can keep himself from healing, but unconscious he can't." Derek pointed out while feeling his temper rise. "What the hell are you talking about, man?" Scott was getting increasingly confused at the bizarre scenario that was currently playing out. None of them were in the right state of mind, so they both ended shouting at each other. You want to know what the spiral means, Scott? It's our sign of vendetta, for revenge. It means he won't stop killing till he's satisfied. Scott was bewildered at Derek's words. You think he's the alpha? He had no idea what the hell was going on in Derek's head that would make him think of such a stupid thing. His boss was normal, for crying out loud. We're about to find out. Derek didn't have the patience and time to try to convince Scott, so he struck at Deaton to wake him up again. But unexpectedly his hand was caught. He looked up and was shocked as he saw a fully transformed Scott. Even Scott was surprised at his own reaction, and it was until he looked at his hands that were adorned with elongated claws that he understood. He took a deep breath and surprisingly he shifted back to his human form, except his eyes were still glowing. Hit him again, and you'll see me truly get angry. He warned Derek. Seeing Scott's gaze and knowing he would have to fight the crazy teen, which would irritate him further, he relented with a sigh and asked, Do you have a plan? Deaton knew something, and he was getting it out of him. Losing his glowing eyes, Scott felt completely exhausted as everything became even more complicated. Give me an hour. This is a terrible idea. Stiles said after he listened to Scott narrating why he was drawn out of his house to school at night. Yeah, I know. Scott simply shook his head. Both of them were in front of their school in the middle of the night because Scott had called Stiles and said he needed his help. Knowing fully well the type of help Scott was talking about, Stiles didn't need to hear what happened and immediately snuck out to meet Scott at their rendezvous. But we're still gonna do it? Stiles asked unsurely after listening to Scott's plan. It was shoddy work at best, but it was workable. Can you think of something better? Stiles only shrugged at Scott's question. Well, personally, I'm a fan of ignoring a problem until it just eventually goes away. Problems were called problems for a reason. Scott only shook his head at his best friend's antics and just resigned himself to going with a complicated turn of events. Just make sure we can get inside. At that moment, they saw Derek's car driving towards them before stopping as the man got out. He's here, Scott said before walking towards Derek. Where's my boss? Derek scoffed and pointed towards the back seat where a bound and fainted Deaton was stuffed in. Seeing Deaton's situation, Stiles couldn't help himself from replying sarcastically. Oh well, at least he looks comfortable. Ignoring Stiles, Scott turned and walked towards the school but was stopped by Derek, who asked him what he was doing. You said I'm linked with the Alpha. He took a deep breath. I'm going to see if you're right. Scott and Stiles walked through the halls of their school, while Derek remained outside to see what the hell they were going to do inside a school that would lead them to the Alpha. Stiles, who followed behind, couldn't help but nervously ask Master Planner Scott. Okay, one question. What are you gonna do if the Alpha doesn't show up? I don't know. Scott replied truthfully. Okay, cool. Then what are you going to do if he does show up? He really hoped his best bud had something up his think tank. I don't know. Unfortunately, his best hope was dashed. Good plan. Who could blame him? Sarcasm was his best coping mechanism. Scott's plan was quite simple. Since he was connected to the Alpha, all he needed to do was to signal him with a big enough flashlight. As for how he was going to do that. All right. You said a wolf howls to signal its packs, right? He asked once more to be sure. But if you bring him here, does that mean you're part of his pack? Stiles asked what he considered the most important question, but it seemed like Scott was bound to disappoint him today. I hope not. Stiles gave up at that moment and just left everything to fate as he gave the stage to Scott to do his thing. Said thing being that Scott proposed to broadcast his howl towards all of Beacon Hills, or as far as it could go, with the school's PA system. His roar was not loud enough after all. AWOWOWOW outside, Derek cringed hard at the pitiful shriek that violated his eardrums. Scott stepped away from the mic, only to see Stiles' painful expression as if he wanted to cry. Was that okay? That was a howl, right? Yeah. Technically. Stiles couldn't even lie with a straight face. Well, what did it sound like to you? Like a cat being choked to death, Scott. He said plainly. Seeing Scott panicking, Stiles shook his head as he knew this was his cue to pick up Robin and set him on the right path. Hey, listen to me. You're calling the Alpha, alright? So be a man, be a wolf. Not a teen wolf. Be a werewolf. You got this. Gaining a bit of his confidence back, Scott took a deep breath as he faced the mic. Tristan and Malia jumped out of bed and shared a look before leaving through the window, as they knew that something was about to go very wrong this night. As for why they decided to spectate, only they knew. At the Argent's house, Chris received a call, and immediately, he and his sister, Kate, left the house silently, with only Victoria being aware. Whoosh. A huge bipedal shadow ran through the woods at a speed that was plainly impossible for any animal to match up with. The only thing that was easily noticed were its red eyes that glowed more fiercely in the night. The three different groups made their way towards where the last group were located, with them being blissfully unaware of the chaos they had caused, all because of one thing they heard. OAR. A wolf's call. A black SUV sped through the empty road with another car following behind it. Chris, who was driving the car, had his phone on loudspeaker as he and Kate both listened to the information of a subordinate. Hawks confirmed that it came from the direction of Beacon Hills High. The school? Are you sure? Chris' face contorted into a frown as he thought of the possibilities. Yes, sir. We'll be there soon. Get here as fast as you can. He said before hanging up. You are thinking that it's a student at Beacon Hills that's the new beta? It wouldn't be the first time. Kate said, all forms of mischievousness gone from her face as she understood the possibility of what they might face. I already expected it as a possibility, but that doesn't mean I have to be very pleased about it. Kate nodded knowingly about his worries. If you want to get there faster, you should probably decide on stepping on that gas like you mean it. Kate said jokingly, that's what I'm doing. They only had one goal in their mind, kill the Alpha. Everything else after that could come later. Tristan and Malia took a shortcut through the woods as they made their way towards the school with their fastest speed. Malia had to get on all fours just to keep up with his speed, and she still trailed behind him regardless. Though they were both night creatures, Tristan had a stronger bond with the nighttime than Malia or any other wolf of their pack did. Can you keep up, Malia? Despite his question, his speed didn't slow down but increased even more. Of course. I think we should hurry up. I can feel something is about to happen. They didn't say another word to each other after that, and made their way towards their school. Derek glared at the two teenagers that were giddily making their way towards him like a pair of high school girls that just got confessed to. I'm going to kill you both. The two of them scratched their heads embarrassedly, but that didn't placate Derek one bit. What the hell were you trying to do? Attract the whole state to school? Sorry. I didn't know it was going to be that loud. Scott apologized sheepishly. Unlike the other two, Styles looked excited as he just witnessed a goodness-to-earth werewolf's howl. Yeah, it was loud, and it was awesome. He shouted excitedly, which caused Derek to glare at him. Shut up. Due to the excitement flooding his veins, Styles forgot his fear of Derek and even teasingly mocked him. Don't be such a sour wolf. Their banter was cut short as Scott called both of their attention to something more important. What did you do with him? Huh? Derek turned to his car and found out that the bound veterinarian had somehow gone missing. Where's the doc? Derek opened the door of his car, but the man had suddenly disappeared without him even knowing it. Where is he, Derek? Scott asked anxiously. The smile on Styles' face had disappeared as he noticed the extreme oddities of what was currently happening. Run. They flinched at the shout and turned around just to see a huge black bipedal monster creeping up on Derek. Seeing how close to being a hunted prey he was, Derek didn't waste any other second and broke into a sprint while shouting at Scott and Styles. Run. Styles staggered as he saw the huge monster that was more of a beast than any version of wolf he had previously imagined. Seeing Styles' stunned state, Scott dragged his hands and broke into a sprint only for their path to be blocked by two incoming SUVs which left the open woods a few distance away as their only escape option. Styles, run or we're going to die. Scott yelled as he dragged his best friend along. I'm the one who's going to die. No matter how you look at this, I'm the least protected person here. Styles shouted as they crossed the field, only to hear a roar behind them which was then followed by a few gunshots. I'm gonna kill you till I die if I die, Scott. Styles screamed. Finally getting a glimpse of the Alpha, Chris' expression turned cold as he saw the reed monster and didn't hesitate to shoot at it. But he missed, allowing the Alpha to chase after his prey towards the woods. Hurry up. We might lose him if he goes deeper into the woods. Kate yelled at Chris and cocked her gun before running towards the forest. Chris shook his head and holstered his crossbow in favor for his gun and ran after Kate towards the woods with their subordinates following behind. Derek weaved through the trees before perching atop a branch and watched as Scott and Styles entered the forest with the Alpha right behind their tails, the Argent following right behind. He looked around and was surprised when he saw the two Buddhist betas. He had narrowly escaped being killed because the girl had warned him at the last moment. "Styles, go home. Now." Scott shouted and pushed Styles forward, knowing fully well that having him around between the Alpha and the Argents would get him killed. "Scott, WH-go." Scott shifted and roared at Styles, reminding the young man of what was about to happen. An open fight. Getting the message, Styles turned around and ran, hoping that Scott manages to survive. He had never hated himself as much as he did at this moment. Roar. The Alpha's roar brought Scott to his knees as his entire body went cold. Luckily for him, Derek, who had been watching, swooped down and dragged him, but he was too slow as he found himself staring at the red eyes of the Alpha, and at that moment anger took over his senses. "Did you kill her?" He asked the Alpha, but the beastly Alpha didn't give him any answer and just sauntered around him as if looking at a prey. Rarark. Derek roared as he shifted, azure blue staring deathly into crimson red. Derek didn't care much about how strong the Alpha was as he attacked. The Alpha, who saw Derek coming to him very fast, didn't react until he was already in arm's reach and grabbed him out of the air and smacked him against a tree. Ruhuer. He roared loudly at Derek and shifted the young Hale back to his human form against his will before throwing him away. Bang. Bang. A bullet impacted against the Alpha's back, who made him turn and growled menacingly against the approaching hunters. A very thick and murderous aura enveloped the area around the Alpha, which made some of the hunters stumble as they finally realized what they were facing. A beast amongst beasts. A king of his hill. The true apex predator. Ruhuer. And then it stood on its 2 feet. It stood at an impressive height of a little over 10 feet, and its long arms and the claws that extended out of them made it look as menacing and despairing as it really was. An Alpha. No one knew when it moved, only reacting after the first scream sounded. The screams lasted only a few seconds before it stopped, signifying to everyone that the first life of the night had been lost. "Tristan, what the hell is that?" On a rare occasion, Malia's voice contained worry and fear as she saw a monster that she never knew existed. An Alpha. A vastly different one. Even Tristan and his skewed sense towards danger instinctively knew of a single fact: he'd die if he were to face that thing. "What are we going to do?" Malia asked as they watched the group of hunters fight against the Alpha. She had to admit that the hunters deserved their reputation, as they actually were keeping the Alpha away from them and even pushing it back. As much as Tristan tried to suppress it, his blood boiled as he saw the monster of an Alpha lash out against the hunters with wild abandon, going for the kill with every strike, while also retreating into the forest. It was a cluster dump of chaos as Derek attacked the Alpha amidst its fight against the Argent hunters, while Scott had lost control and attacked one of the hunters, breaking their link and giving the Alpha some exercising room that it immediately took advantage of and reaped another life. Derek crept up behind the Alpha and jumped onto its back and dug his claws into its shoulders while Chris fired another bullet. Rhea Argarg. The Alpha roared in pain as the wolfsbane-laced bullet pierced its skin and thrashed around, throwing Derek off in the process. Not wasting a moment, Derek attacked the nearest hunter to his position by sweeping at his legs and then bashed his head with a dropped gun, effectively knocking that one out of the fight. Scott, on the other hand, was covered in blood as his claws tore through the flesh of the hunter fighting against him. Seeing how they were starting to lose their men, Kate reached into the small pouch on her waist and took a small oval item and threw it without hesitation towards where Scott was. The moment whatever she threw impacted the ground, it blinded both Scott and the Alpha's eyes due to its blindingly bright light and their own sensitive visuals. Chris. They both knew what they needed to do as she cocked her Benelli M4 and shot at the Alpha decisively, while Chris shot Scott. Luckily for the young boy, Derek narrowly saved him from death from a hunter's hands as he dived him towards the ground. Unfortunately for Derek, his actions caused him to be easily surrounded as the Alpha had disappeared deeper into the woods. Shielding Scott with his arms, he growled at the incoming hunters that had formed a circle around him. Tristan. Malia called him and waited for his decision. If he decided that they were leaving them there, then she would go along with it, but she had to urge him to so that they could leave quickly before the hunters started branching out. When she turned to look at Tristan, All she saw were his eyes glowing blue with labored breaths as he stared intently as the hunters. The alpha badly affected them both. But Tristan, who was more susceptible to raw emotions and bloodlust, was hit rather hard when he felt the cold hatred and oath of blood from the alpha. Tristan. She tapped his hand silently, and that was enough for his focus to break as he turned to face her, his eyes still glowing. We should leave. Tristan looked at Derek, who had been shot twice, but still didn't let Scott go, and he made an impulsive decision, partly fueled by lust. Let's do it. He only said those words, but Malia understood. His pupils turned into two small black dots in a sea of blue as he marked his prey. Crunch. It was so fast and unexpected that no one even expected something like this, given the fact that the only threat, which was the alpha, had escaped heavily wounded, and the two betas were only seconds away from being bagged. The victim couldn't even scream as his neck was forcefully twisted due to the force with which it was held. Kate reacted a moment after than Chris, but none of that mattered as Tristan latched onto the neck of his second prey before he disappeared. He's gone. Chris' voice made them turn around to find out that Derek and the other alpha were gone. Damn it. Kate cursed and kicked the ground in anger as they failed to even secure just one beta while the alpha escaped. Be on alert. There might still be lurking around. Chris warned, but unfortunately, the perpetrators were long gone from the vicinity, and the only thing they could show for this hunt were a few dead men. To say they were angry would be a gross understatement. Two figures ran through the dead quiet forest with haste as they put as much distance between them and the hunters as much as they could. Malia and Derek, who was carrying a passed-out Scott, weaved and dodged the wavy trees, both eyes glowing blue to show the state of their mind as they pushed forward and tore the peaceful black canvas of night with the sound of the screaming wind that blew against their bodies. Sharing a quick glance, they both slid to a halt and turned to a particular direction where they could hear something gaining in on them with a downright frightening speed. Before any of them could question what was approaching them, Tristan blurred and skid to a stop in front of them. Blood spattered across his chest and face with his fangs partly visible from his slightly crooked mouth. You're slow, he said after taking in a few seconds to rein in his all-too-vibrant emotions. You're too fast. Malia huffed and relaxed her shoulders. The night had been quite a festival of emotions for her, and it was only now that she was finally able to catch her breath. Derek watched the boy with 50% gratefulness, 40% wariness, and 10% curiosity. He might not have put too much thought on their differences, but looking at the young boy now, he could tell that he was way too different from him, Scott, or even Malia. He was a different supernatural altogether. What? Tristan asked as he sensed Derek's scrutinizing gaze in him. Nothing. Just wondering what you are, he said before shaking his head. I believe I owe both of you thanks for bailing us out. It would have been hell had we been caught. Derek nudged at the sleeping teen on his back. Derek had to acknowledge the fact that he had been too hasty with looking for the alpha, and it was only when he saw that monster that he knew just how far of reach he was to it. It was stronger, faster, fiercer, and more beastly than any other werewolf he had seen, and those eyes. They might be the same haunting crimson red he had seen a bunch of times in his childhood, but the feeling he got from them was different. It was pure malice. Good, you know. Honestly, the only reason we came out here is because I felt some sort of pull, and also that stupidly loud howl that probably woke up half of the town. He and Malia had woken up because of the howl, but the main reason he came out was because of the impulse he felt. Blood. He felt the call for blood, one so intense that he just couldn't sit back. Unfortunately, he didn't know that the carrier of such bloodlust was a monstrous alpha that shook all his preconceived notions of what an alpha was. What are you going to do with him? He pointed at Scott. Derek let out a despondent sigh. The alpha clearly answered his call, and he knows I'm onto him now. I'll keep an eye on Scott for the time being. He's the only link I have to the alpha. Derek said. He would normally be secretive about his objectives, since he knew there was nobody in Beacon Hills that he could trust, but the two people in front of him, he knew, had no business with his own personal vendetta. They were part of another pack, one widely known for their impassive way of life, and the fact that they saved him, not once but twice, made him afford them the least level of what could be called camaraderie. The hunters? He asked. Tristan let out a small frown at that, directed at the hunters, and snorted, they're retreating. I think the alpha did more damage to them than they were comfortable with. For your comfort though, I don't think they figured out who Scott was. Or me. Derek's shoulders slumped in relief at Tristan's words. He couldn't even begin to imagine how shitty things would get if the hunters cracked down on Scott. With someone like Kate around, it didn't matter if he was still a kid or not. She'll torture him all the same and then kill him if he outlived his use. Propping Scott up against his back for better balance, he then turned to Tristan and Malia and then asked, "What about the two of you? What are you going to do?" "Nothing." He nodded since he was well aware of the complexity and volatility of his situation. Not to mention that they were just two high school students and also from another pack, the amount of help they could give was minimal at best. "I see. Then I'll be going first." He was about to kick himself into motion, but stopped when he remembered a question he wanted to ask since the beginning. "What are you, by the way?" He could tell the girl was animalistic in some ways, so she was definitely a worse supernatural, but the boy was different. Even when he shifted, that feral nature that was present in all worse supernatural was lacking in him. Tristan chuckled at the familiar question he hadn't heard in a while. "Me? I'm something else." Derek let out a small laugh at what he considered cheekiness before turning around and running away, leaving the two teens in the middle of the forest. They both looked at each other, "Go home," shrugged and made their way in another direction. Chris Argent POV crash. A shelf of weapons crashed against the ground as Kate threw anything she could get her hands on across the cellar. "Keep it down, will you? Allison's still sleeping." Chris chided his sister, who was raging and throwing weapons all over the place. "What?" she questioned and turned to face Chris, who was the epitome of calm as he sipped his glass for scotch. "We lost, Chris. We didn't even get one of the betas." "One." She screamed in his face, but the only thing she got in reply was an irritated raised brow and a bone-chilling reprimand. "Watch your tone." She snorted and folded her hands over her chest and looked at Chris, who was just calmly drinking as if none of this could get through to him. "Are you not going to say anything? Are you done hyperventilating?" he asked back. "I am not high. Damn it. I need a drink," she said as she grabbed the bottle with Chris and proceeded to chug it down, ignoring the irritated scowl that painted her brother's face. "Fua. That hit the spot." She exhaled in good spirits as she felt the burning sensation of alcohol in her system. "So, what's up with you?" Chris had been awfully quiet ever since they came back, silently placating himself with glass after glass of scotch as his mind went over everything they overlooked, from Derek to the new beta. From the new beta to the alpha. Who was that? Who? The one that got two of our guys? It's the alpha. Who else could it be? But there was no blood. Huh. That's right. There was no blood when he cased the trajectory of the Blur's attack. The only blood that was on the scene was that of his men. The alpha was injured, with at least 2 types of wolfsbane to boot. There was no way for him to heal in such a short time, and his mobility would have been much worse if he shifted to a human form. Chris explained what he found weird from the last attack. His supernatural speed aside, the method of kill was way too precise, something premeditated, and not a spur of action. "Another one? You don't really believe there's another beta out there, do you?" Kate was very skeptical of this reasoning. While she was the one who pointed out the possibility of a new beta than Derek Hale, she didn't think the alpha would sire another beta when he still had his hand full with whoever the first one was. "Do you really think a beta would attack when its alpha has retreated?" "That, I'm not too sure. Notwithstanding, I don't think it was the alpha who attacked us. This means that there's at least 3 betas and an alpha involved in their vendetta." Chris forced down the weary sigh that almost creeped up his throat with another swig of his glass. He massaged his temple as he felt a headache building up at how shitty everything was quickly becoming and how blind they were. Derek most likely knew who the beta was since he protected him from them, and the other one that attacked them knew who they both were. The same could be said about the alpha, leaving them, the hunters, in the foggy dark. Kate extended the bottle to Chris as his glass was empty, earning her a wordless thanks as he made to refill it. "So, what are we gonna do? You know, the more we waste time, the more he'll be tempted to come, right?" Chris frowned at what her words meant, since he knew quite well just how messy things could become if his father were to join in on the hunt. "We'll take care of the alpha before he acts on any vested interest. And that's a night for today." He finished his glass and left Kate all to herself as he retired to bed, hoping to have a clear mind come morning. Derek Hale Pui. Derek dropped the body of Scott on the floor of his room, deciding it was safer to go to the McCall house than his place since he doesn't know if the hunters were keeping an eye on him or were running surveillance on his place. Thankfully for his intrusion, Melissa, Scott's mom usually worked the night shift for some extra pay at Beacon Hills Memorial Hospital, so he didn't have to face an agitated mother and explain why and how her son was poisoned and the numerous slash wounds on his body. He could feel the effects of the wolfsbane in his system, and the slight woozy feeling he was getting was telling him that its effects were already permeating his system. Luckily, he didn't have to think much as the door to Scott's room was kicked open by a panicking Stiles who gasped in abject horror as he saw the state the both of them were in, mostly focused on Scott. What the hell happened? He almost screamed, only to have his mouth covered by Derek, who stopped him because of the ringing he was feeling in his ears. No need to make it even worse by having the worm overreact. He's not dead if that's what you're asking. Wolfsbane's in his system, and him being asleep is making it travel faster. We're going to have to burn it out if you don't want him halfway gone before morning comes. Derek said in one breath as he started feeling ticklish from the wounds that were still on his chest and back. But there's not just bullet wounds. There's also slash wounds. Why isn't he healing from those? Stiles asked as he took off Scott's ruined shirt and gagged at the mutilated flesh underneath. It's because it came from an alpha. Those take longer time to heal. That's enough talk for now. Derek went over to Scott's side and without even explaining anything to the curious Stiles, took a hold of one of Scott's arm and broke it. Crack. Ah. Scott screamed himself awake as the jolt of pain that passed through his body rebooted his brain. Stiles, go get it now. Stiles ran out of the room and returned moments later with something to burn out the wolfsbane from Scott's body. Hold him steady. Oh God. Stiles' stomach retched as he saw how Derek burned human's flesh with impunity, as had to use his whole might to stop himself from passing out and throwing up. Derek ignored Scott's baleful screams as he held the young wolf down with one hand along with Stiles, while burning him with the other. Thud. Thud. Unable to bear the pain any longer, Scott passed out as Derek burned the last of his hunter-inflicted wounds, which left him with patches of freshly and deeply burnt skin. You'll have to burn mine out, he looked over, only to find out Stiles had passed out too. They returned home without much fanfare and immediately crashed on their beds, too bereft of energy to do anything else, not even take a bath. It only took a few moments before they embraced Morpheus and passed the night to his domain. Unfortunately for them, and all involved, school continued as normal the next day. Though the sheriff department had immediately investigated the cause of the loud howl from Beacon Hills high PA systems due to the outrageous number of phone calls they got during the night, they didn't find anything conclusive, which made them think that it was just normal high school students having fun at the expense of half the county. As for the parties involved, apart from the elusive Alpha, the Argents were in a constant state of caution as they realized just how far into danger Allison was. On Derek's part, the grumpy werewolf was currently laying low until the next full moon passed. Stiles spent the night at Scott's passed out, while the duo of Tristan and Malia just enjoyed a night's sleep as the adrenaline wore off. Like usual, Tristan was the first one who got up and went to make breakfast, a chicken and mushroom risotto. Turning the rice into the chicken mushroom broth, he mused over his thoughts and decided to call Elias. Seeing the alpha yesterday, the thought of there being different types of alphas crossed his mind, and if so, he wanted to know if there was any meaning of such a mutated change than the one he was used to. The highest change he's ever seen in Satomi was her eyes glowing red, nothing more. She's never fully shifted to his knowledge for as long as he's known her, and even betas like Brett, Lori and Jiang even said they've never seen a full shift in Satomi. He covered the pot after filtering in the rice and waited as the phone rang. Lodging the phone between his ears and shoulders, he started chopping and bringing out the spices and condiments he wanted the rice to go with. Hello, little Tristan. Elias' grumpy old voice echoed out of the speakers. Good morning, Elias. Did I wake you up? He asked. No. What's up for calling this early anyway? Was it about the howl some people are saying they heard? Of course such a loud howl would alert any werewolves around, since any wolf would know that that was a call for attention. Even if Tristan wasn't a wolf, he was still part of a werewolf pack, and he knew what most of their animalistic behaviors meant. Yeah, about that. Tristan winced at the reminder. We kind of answered the call. We, as in me and Malia, answered a beta's call for their alpha. The silence that followed was unbearable for Tristan, and somehow made his nerves grow taut from the tension. Sigh. All the tension flowed out of his nerves like water through a pipe as he heard Elias sigh. And? Why did you call? Tristan gave silent thanks as he saw Elias ignore their blunder. Yeah, about that. I was wondering if alphas have their own type of shift. I don't understand. Elias' confused voice came back. The alpha, we saw him, but he was different from anything I've seen. Tristan said. How different? Tristan glanced at the simmering pot and uncovered it, letting a very rich, flavorful aroma waft into his nose. He returned his attention to the ongoing call as he threw in the diced chicken, mushrooms, and sesame. Well, for starters, it was more beastly. Not a wolf, at least not what a normal wolf looks like. And also he was very huge. Honestly, he should be referred to as a monster more than anything else. He explained how the alpha looked to Elias, who remained silent over the line as he listened to everything Tristan remembered of the alpha. Wait a moment, Satomi-san is calling. I'll link us up. Elias suddenly said, and Tristan was put on hold for a second before another voice came through the speakers. Tristan, how have you been doing since we last spoke, little one? Satomi's accented voice asked with a soft tone to it. Grandma, I've been okay so far. A small smile unconsciously made its way to his lips as he answered Satomi. Satomi was more than old enough to be considered the mother and grandmother of everyone in her pack, even Elias, which was why Tristan called her grandma. Elias mentioned you had something to ask me about alphas? Yes. He then repeated what he said to Elias to Satomi. The reason he didn't just call Satomi was because most times she was usually in dead zones with no one knowing where she was and how to reach her. There were times she was around and times she was not. Though rare, it is not something new, especially to werewolves. It's the same reason why you're not a werewolf despite receiving the bite from me. Satomi said, surprising Tristan with her response. The only thing he knew about himself was that Satomi's bite had mutated him to something else. Like she said, though rare, it was something that happened from time to time. A werewolf's bite was not always guaranteed to sire a werewolf. Sometimes it is something entirely different, like a were-coyote, a were-hyena, or even a were-lion. On some of these occasions, the bite might even end up siring a creature of an entirely different origin. And how exactly does that compare to alphas? He tentatively listened to Satomi's explanation and memorized everything she said. A werewolf's evolution to an alpha is not always as simple as gaining a new pair of red eyes. It's something deeper than that. Tristan and Elias, who had fallen silent, noted each of her words since they both knew that things like this was not something that was widely known, mostly among betas. Compared to betas, alphas have more connection with the moon and is also the reason why there are a few basic differences between them, some even spiritual in nature. For one, no beta, not one, can subdue an alpha on his own. They can never call an alpha to submission, and without an alpha, they cannot draw on the strengths of others. Strength in numbers. It was a very simple and even basic concept that worked on common sense that something is naturally stronger in tandem to their increasing quantity. 1 + 1 = 2, and 2 was a number greater than 1 in every way. When it came to werewolves, this common trait was also the reason why they were one of the most feared supernatural species. Simply put, the more members they were in a werewolf pack, the stronger the alpha and the betas got. This very reason was why hunters preferred going after the betas in a pack rather than the alpha. In another vein, due to the evolution from beta to alpha, the werewolf's drive at that moment of mutation is what creates his path as an alpha, and most times, due to the intensity which are mostly negative, it ends up warping their appearance when they shift. What you saw is probably an alpha that ascended carrying such intense emotions. And we can clearly guess what it was that forged his path as an alpha, right? Revenge. Elias answered with a low hum. Exactly. Just the way there are not too many similarities between an alpha and beta, you could also conversely say that an alpha is the true reflection of what a beta can be. Tristan turned off the gas and started cleaning where he used to cook as he heard Malia coming downstairs. I understand somewhat the difference between the two of them, but how do we exactly reflect an alpha? Betas can become alphas, and alphas can fall down back to being betas. That I know, but I don't think that's the reflection you're talking about. You know why the eyes of werewolves and some were creatures change color? Satomi asked, even when they all knew the obvious answer. Nevertheless, Tristan respectfully answered yes. Just the way a beta can feel severe pain to the point that their eyes lose their bright golden innocence, An alpha can also undergo something just as traumatic or different from their nature, and it sometimes ends up warping their appearance down to their soul. And it stays that way if they don't reconcile with it or embrace their new self. Satomi's explanations were always clear-cut and precise, making sure that whoever heard her understood just what she was saying with each word she spoke. Though he might have been ignorant to the changes of a werewolf that also affected alphas, it actually didn't matter that much since such things would hardly affect him as he was not a wolf. Not even a were supernatural. His paranoia just wouldn't let him allow something strange as the beastly alpha he saw sweep away from his mind. It also didn't help that they haven't found a supernatural being like him, except from Wendigos. He didn't know why, but any time the comparison between his and a Wendigo came into discussion, he always felt irked, his innate nature showing his natural distaste of the creatures who couldn't live without feasting on human flesh. Being a rare, or possibly near-extinct supernatural creature was not a good thing in any way. His thoughts were cut short as he felt a pair of arms wrap around his waist and a head nudging his neck with a chin on his shoulders. "I see. Thank you, Grandma." He thanked Satomi and ignored Malia, who melded into his back in favor of boiling a pot of water for tea. Malia woke up quite early so they could have some green tea saturated from herbal leaves before they went to school. Quite refreshing for starting the day and washing away any residual stress they were feeling. "It's fine, my dear." Satomi waved off his thanks, since she didn't see anything wrong in telling them. In this part of their world, your knowledge was very crucial to your survival. "Malia dear, I know you're there. How was your night?" Elias had already put himself on hold, since he was no longer needed in the conversation, but had to come back as he heard Malia had woken up. "Hey little one." Malia was still sleepy, but not to the point where she couldn't answer them. "Grandma, Elias. Good morning. We had quite a pretty intense night. With the alpha. Tristan told you." She was roused up from her dizziness with a poke from Tristan, who wanted some space so he could bend down. "Yes." Satomi affirmed. "Why don't you guys visit? Richard and Luke will be visiting soon. How about you guys come too?" Elias suggested. Malia took the phone from Tristan's neck and gave him the space he needed while she chatted with Elias and Satomi, where Tristan got ready to dish the food. He didn't tell Satomi about the two people he killed, as he knew that was because of him giving in to his instincts as he saw unsuspecting and defenseless prey, coaxing him to attack. Luckily, he kept himself from the hunter's views during the whole thing. This just went to show just how easily influenced he was when blood and intense emotions mix. Malia dropped the phone on top of the counter as she was done with the call and opened the fridge. "I would have settled for blood this morning, but I think tea is also nice. Water." Tristan nodded, and she brought a bottle of water to the table, and both sat to enjoy a sustaining meal before going to school. "Think anything will change?" she asked before pausing to let out a deep hum at the taste of the food. "Probably more hunts. McCall finally calling his alpha for whatever reason is bound to make him start coming out. Hopefully we're still out of his vision's range because of what happened yesterday." They both grimaced as they remembered their frankly not so bright actions the previous night. Malia mulled it over and shrugged. "What's the worst that could happen? Though you're tempting, Murphy, I have to agree."
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.